Chapter 1509. Reeks, Wanjinren came to the cloud platform and invited someone to report. After a short while, the Taoist guarding the platform opened up a path for him and he came to the floating platform. He cupped his hands towards the top and said, "Wan Rong requests to see Sect Master." After a while, a majestic clear chi descended from the sky. A Taoist figure that was thousands of feet tall and surrounded by light appeared. It was the headmaster of Mount Luo, Master Xian Hong. Because his real body resided in the sky beyond heaven, he did not usually appear. Only when the sect's reverend asked for an audience or when there was a major event would a clone descend. At this moment, he looked down and said kindly, "Enlightened Master Wan, I heard that you have something important to discuss with me." Enlightened Master Wan bowed again and said, "Headmaster, the Xian stone has moved. Perhaps the fated person that the founding master spoke of is about to arrive at my Xian Hong heaven." Master Xian Hong grunted and said, "He should be here." Enlightened Master Wan said, "Headmaster, outside the heavens there is a space disorienting formation, and there is also the Yuju barrier. There are also the void demons and the Jade Kun guards. Those who do not know the way will have a hard time. Since that person is the person that the founding master wanted me to wait for, should Mount Luo send someone to receive him?" Master Xian Hong said indifferently, "Although the founding master ordered us to guard this divine object, he did not want me to protect this person. This might be a test that the founding master left behind. If we were to interfere rashly, wouldn't it go against the founding master's original intention?" Enlightened Master Wan was startled. He hesitated as if he wanted to say something, but when the words were at the tip of his tongue, he could not open his mouth. Master Xian Hong looked at him and said, "Enlightened Master Wan, you go first. If that person does not arrive here, it means that he is not the person that the founding master spoke of." Enlightened Master Wan said yes, bowed to the opposite seat, and retreated. Coming out from the rooftop, he returned to the cave, but his thoughts were heavy along the way. He felt that Guru Xian Hong's words made some sense, but since the ancestral master didn't say it explicitly, it would be up to them to decide whether or not they would send people to protect him. Thinking of this, he sighed in his heart, "I'm afraid the sect master is still thinking about what happened last time. If this person dies outside, then it's fine. But if he succeeds and comes to my place, and in the future he finds out that Mount Luo didn't help him, it's inevitable that there will be discord." As he was flying, a handsome Taoist with a jade hairpin in his hair came from afar. When this person saw him, his expression was a little surprised. He greeted, "Isn't that Jinren Wan? Long time no see." Spiritual Master Wan heard the voice and stopped. Seeing the person who came, he hurriedly cupped his hands and said, "So it's Spiritual Master Song. My apologies." This Spiritual Master Song was of the same generation as Master Xian Hong. He was the last disciple of the Upper Heaven Lord. Moreover, one of his sworn brothers was cultivating in the Green Jade Palace and had a high status in the sect. Thus, he did not dare to slight him. Spiritual Master Song came up to greet him. He looked at the rooftop in the clouds, then glanced at him and said, "Spiritual Master One seems to have come from the rooftop, but you went to see the sect master. Could it be that the divine object has changed?" Spiritual Master Wan thought about it and felt that there was nothing to hide, so he said, "The divine object has moved. I thought that the person that the ancestral master mentioned is coming, so I came to report to the sect master and ask if we should go and receive him." When Spiritual Master Song heard this, his spirit was lifted, and he asked, "Oh, what did the sect master say?" Spiritual Master Wan smiled bitterly and repeated Master Xian Hong's original words. He added, "Whether or not he can get past those obstacles depends on this person's fate." When Spiritual Master Song heard this, he revealed an anxious expression, and his voice suddenly rose, "The sect master is muddle-headed." Spiritual Master Wan was stunned. "Spiritual Master Song, why do you say this? The sect master has his own considerations, and what he said might not be unreasonable." However, Spiritual Master Song waved his hand and said in a deep voice, "Perhaps from the sect master's point of view, even if this matter is known by that person, it is not a big deal. However, how can the person chosen by the ancestral master be so simple? This person is a fellow Taoist of our Luo Mountain Monastery. We can clearly form a good relationship with him, but he chose to do such a thing. Isn't the sect master muddle-headed? Spiritual Master 1 defended Master Xian Hong. Perhaps this person will not be able to reach my Xian Hong heaven. Spiritual Master Song snorted coldly and said, if this person cannot get past the obstacles of outer space, then it is the Ancestral Master's fault. Above that, I am still more willing to believe in the Ancestral Master. Spiritual Master 1 was speechless. He sighed and said, then what do you think we should do? Spiritual Master Song thought for a moment and said, it is not impossible to remedy this. Since the sect master did not say anything about this matter, then let me go and receive this person. Spiritual Master 1 was startled. Spiritual Master to receive him? Spiritual Master Song said, the sect master did not say that we are not allowed to go. I will sell him a favor now, and it will be easier in the future. Spiritual Master 1 nodded slowly. This was a good idea. Spiritual Master Song had never liked to procrastinate. Once the decision was made, he was about to set off immediately. However, at this moment, an auspicious cloud came over, and on it stood a child. He held a jade book in his hand and said, pass down the sect master's order. Recently, to fill up the sect's great formation, everyone must stay in the courtyard and not go out to protect the sect. Spiritual Master Song's expression changed, and his body immediately stopped on the spot. Spiritual Master 1 was also silent. The sect master rarely made mistakes in his actions. It was obvious that he had already calculated that someone might go on their own, so he gave an order to block this path. Spiritual Master Song snorted, flicked his sleeve, and left. He only left behind a sentence, I will see how the sect master will deal with this in the future. At this moment, in Song Kong Golden Residence, He Xian was hidden in a pure perched Taoist robe. He was standing on the peak of the cliff, playing music with his flute. The melody was slow at first, but then it quickly turned up, and the rhythm suddenly became faster. The aura also became stronger, like a raging wave beating the shore, the wind and clouds surging. Although the surrounding spiritual vigor and clear qi changed with the sound, it was turbulent for a moment. However, halfway through the song, when it was about to reach the climax, it suddenly stopped. He put down the jade flute, and said with displeasure, what's the matter? The maidservant behind him said in a trembling voice, Master, the sect master sent an order, saying that the mountain gate's great formation needs to be repaired with a new method. He wants everyone to stay in the sect to protect it, and not to go out. He Xian thought for a moment, and said, the great formation has been cleaned 1,000 years ago. Just now, the formation jade is extremely troublesome to repair. It has only been a long time, so there shouldn't be any big changes. The sect master obviously wants everyone to stay in the sect, and he wouldn't do this for no reason. Quickly go and find out why. The maidservant replied timidly, and turned around to find out the news. Not long after, she turned back and reported, Master, it seems that Spiritual Master 1 just now went to find the sect master, and said that the owner of the divine item that the founding master mentioned is about to arrive, and then this order came. When He Xian heard this, he knew the whole story, and said in a calm tone, got it. The maidservant bowed and left. He Xian Yin looked up at the sky, and there was a hidden coldness in his eyes. Not to mention that the void beyond the heavens was full of dangers. Without the guidance of a familiar person, it would take a long time. Even the person that the founding master mentioned might not be able to pass through within 1,000 years, and once the agreed time passed, the owner of the mystic stone would no longer be that person. At the same time, in the void primordial sea, after a year's journey, Zhang Yan finally arrived at the place pointed out by the great underworld founding master. However, he found that this place was different from all the void spaces that he had been to before. He could feel that there were layers of obstructions outside the heaven and earth gate, and his divine will constantly deviated to other places. In fact, without the intent left by the founding master, even someone with a similar cultivation as him would not be able to sense that there was another universe behind this. This is a formation set up by a powerful person using innate barriers and acquired methods. It should be to prevent outsiders from entering, and it will be difficult to enter if there is no other way. However, after thinking about it, since there were traces here, it meant that the other party did not block the path completely, and still left some leeway. As long as he found the right place, he could enter. UU3, this was not a flaw deliberately revealed by the people of this world, but a way out for himself. Otherwise, the heaven and earth gate would become incomparably sturdy, and it would kill his own people. It was easy to say, but it was actually not easy to do. He could only find it himself. With a slight calculation, this formation did not have much power, but it was very complicated. If he was unlucky, he would probably be delayed for hundreds of years, and even if everything went smoothly, it would still take close to 100 years. Moreover, there were obstacles here, and it was hard to guarantee that there would not be any in the future. The Zicheng great medicine that he had could only last for hundreds of years, and it was impossible to use them all here, so he could only use the remnant jade to deduce. After having a plan, he sat down cross-legged, held the remnant jade, and sank his mind into it. After just over 100 days, he came out on his own. His eyes were shining, and he drove the skyscraping boat towards the formation. If it was said that there was a layer of fog before him, then after unlocking the formation, all of this disappeared, and he could clearly feel the location of the realm pass. He faintly comprehended something. As the saying goes, if the heart is clear, then it will be clear. This should be the method of the person who set up the formation in the past. As long as one knew how to enter and exit the pass, there was no need to deliberately pass through the formation, and to him, this was a smooth road. After he passed through the formation smoothly, he suddenly noticed something strange, and he immediately knew that he'd entered the body of a variant in the void. He'd had a similar experience in the past, so he withdrew the blood essence of the rock, Ingui, and circulated his cultivation technique to shake it. However, it was useless this time. His eyes flashed. Hiding from their own kind was the nature of the void's alien species. Now that there was no movement at all, either this alien species was extremely special, or it had been tamed by someone. What he was facing now was most likely the latter. But no matter which one it was, he would not be able to escape if he used the blood essence of his own kind. If this had happened before he obtained the strength path root fruit, perhaps he would have to spend a lot of effort. Perhaps he would have to put in quite a bit of effort, but it was different at this moment. This spatial variant wasn't superior to him in essence, and he just had to charge through it. However, doing that would bring him more trouble in the end, so it was best to avoid it. Thus, with a thought, the scenery around him shattered in the next moment. The spatial anomaly suddenly disappeared, and the skyscraping spirit boat hovered outside the array formation, unscathed. Just now, everything he experienced was the change in the future that he had seen with his divine will before entering this place. However, this only allowed him to be on guard. Knowing that there was a void creature in front of him, it was not certain that he could avoid it. He silently observed for a moment, and found that he had used up a lot of his divine will. In his heart, he understood that this method could only be used occasionally when facing a beast that was similar to him, and it could not be used as a normal method. Since he knew that there was something strange in front of him, he became especially cautious as he moved forward. When he came over, he did not encounter the void creature again, until another strange formation appeared in front of him. To be continued. Chapter 15:10. Just as Zhang Yan arrived at the formation, there were two Taoists in Xianhong heaven who were patrolling on the celestial globe. One of the Taoists who was dressed in a golden robe suddenly sensed something. He did not neglect it and pointed at the space between his eyebrows and said in a deep voice, "Junior brother Quan, someone seems to have passed through the mystification formation." After the person who was addressed as Junior brother Quan heard it, he sat down for a moment and exclaimed, "There really is someone." He thought for a moment and said, "The Feast of Delicacies is coming soon. Could it be a messenger from another realm?" The Taoist in a golden robe denied it. "If that's the case, they would have used a globe to inform us first and not come without notifying us. Maybe it's a cultivator from another realm who accidentally trespassed into our Xianhong heaven. Let me take a look and we'll know." He formed a hand seal and circulated his transcendence energy. After a long time, he raised his sleeve and waved it on the celestial orbit. Celestial orbit. A ray of spiritual light flashed and a human figure appeared within it. However, the figure was extremely huge and seemed to have no boundaries. Furthermore, the spiritual light seemed to have been seized by the aura. It actually rippled and swayed, making it hard to see clearly. The Taoist in a golden robe took a few glances and exclaimed, "This person's qi dynamic is deep and vast, but it's extremely obscure. Even the celestial globe can't illuminate it and we can't identify his origin." Junior brother Quan's expression tightened and said, "Senior brother, should we inform the sect?" The Taoist in a golden robe shook his head and said, "There's no need for that. This person can pass through the mystification formation and his supernatural power must be very powerful. However, without informing the sect, he definitely won't be able to pass through the mystification formation. Let's just wait for him to pass on his own. There's no need to alarm everyone." Junior brother Quan thought about it and expressed his agreement. Actually, the person was in the void primordial sea and they couldn't do anything even if they wanted to. They could only sit and watch. The sect placed them here to prevent any accidents. Zhang Yan observed for a long time in front of the formation and realized that the formation was a complete mess and it extended into an unknown number of spaces. What he could sense was only the side that could be sensed and he couldn't touch the real thing. This feeling was like walking in front of a reflection. You could clearly see what it was, but if you tried to step over it to find the real thing, then it would immediately shatter, leaving you nowhere to find it. As he pondered, even if he used his divine sense in the void's primordial sea, it could only land on himself and not on the outside. Therefore, it was very likely that the formation and this place were set up with the help of the void creatures. However, this was the place where the great underworld patriarch had pointed out the opportunity, so he could not rule out the possibility of a true young mighty cultivator interfering. It would be extremely difficult to find a loophole. Seeing that he was pacing back and forth outside the array barrier without making any movements, the two Taoists in the celestial telescope smiled. The golden-robed Taoist stroked his beard and said, "It is rumored that the maze barrier of our Xian Hongtian was created by a treasure in the hands of our founding master. Without the permission of the heaven master of our world, no outsider can enter." Junior brother Quan became much more relaxed at this moment. He said optimistically, "I think this person will leave soon." The golden-robed Taoist nodded slowly. Zhang Yan tried a few methods outside, but he could not find the correct entrance. He could not help but think that this array barrier must have something to do with the opening. If he could not enter at all, there was no need for the founding master to leave that trace of thought behind. Thinking about this, he suddenly had an idea. He thought that he could give it a try. If it worked, perhaps it would be very easy to pass this stage. He reached into his sleeve and took out a jade seal. This seal represented his identity as the Duzhen Hall Master of Qinsang School. It was also one of the 3 official seals left behind by the great underworld patriarch when he opened up the small world of the 3 halls and established the orthodoxy of Qinsang School. Holding the seal in his hand, he activated his mana and a clear ray of light shone out. In a trance, he seemed to have touched something. The maze barrier in front of him suddenly disappeared like snow melting under the scorching sun or a curtain of water rolling back. For a moment, there was no longer any cover in front of him, and the void in front of him could be clearly sensed. His eyes flashed. It was just as he thought. Since it was the great underworld patriarch's guidance, he would not deliberately make things difficult for the descendants. With his current identity, he could enter. He had also thought that if it was not him but an ordinary disciple who came here today, even if the disciple had amazing supernatural power, he would not be able to pass. But after thinking about it again, he felt that the arrangement of the founding master was very reasonable. In Qinsang School, only those who sat at the top could obtain enough external things for cultivation. In other words, those with profound cultivation must have had a high enough position in the sect before coming here. Otherwise, how could they cultivate to the upper realm? For example, he had started as a lower house disciple, opened his meridian to become a direct disciple, became one of the top 10 disciples after the inner sect competition, then became one of the top 10 seats, worked his way up to the left hall master of the Duzhen Hall, and finally sat in the main hall. He did not know how many people of the same generation he had killed. Those who were not strong enough were pushed down long ago, and could not reach this step at all. Also, with the original foundation of Qinsang School, to have the qualifications to see the secret method, break through the 12 barriers and complete the mental cultivation method, and at the same time cut off the future body, this could only appear in the sect master and the 2 hall masters, no one else. He put away the jade seal and tried to examine it. He found that this world was different from the void he had seen before. It looked like a nebula, and outside, there were large glass-like koans swimming around. There seemed to be hundreds of them. Although there seemed to be a lot of them on the surface, he could only sense one. The rest of them were the reflections of this large koan, or rather, they were just a part of its body. It was just that those who had not cultivated enough could not see the mysteries within. At this moment, among these jade koan, one flew up and circled around the skyscraping spirit boat. Finally, it walked in front of the spirit boat, as if it was leading the way. Zhang Yan thought about it. Back then, Tai Ming Patriarch came here riding the large koan in Gui, and he saw another one here. If there was no accident, it should be left by the Patriarch. He cupped his hands in the spirit boat and said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist." A slightly hoarse female voice came, "You don't have to be so polite. How is Ngui?" Zhang Yan's heart moved slightly, and he said, "Everything is fine." Hearing this, the voice seemed to be very happy, and said, "This place is called Xianhong Heaven, and the thing that Exalted True is looking for is here." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Thank you for telling me, fellow Taoist." As they spoke, the large koan had already crashed into the gate of heaven and earth. Seeing this, he also moved the spirit boat forward and instantly passed the gate between the 2 realms. He followed closely behind and rushed in. Although the 2 Taoists patrolling in the sky could vaguely see Zhang Yan's figure, they could not completely know what was happening outside because their qi dynamic was not obvious. Originally, they were about to wait for Zhang Yan to leave, but suddenly, they felt a tremor in the gate of heaven and earth, and then the spiritual light on the celestial instrument broke. It was obvious that someone was coming into our realm. Both of them were dumbfounded. The golden-robed Taoist grabbed his beard and said, "How did this person get in? Could he be a cultivator from another branch? But even if it's someone like that, it's impossible for them to enter our world without being notified." Junior brother Quan hurriedly said, "Senior brother Bai, this is strange. Let's quickly report to the Exalted True." The golden-robed Taoist shook his head and smiled bitterly, "Such a huge commotion, why do we still need to report to the Exalted True? I'm afraid that someone will come later to question me for my negligence." Just as he said, at this moment, all the Exalted True of the Luo mountain lineage immediately sensed it. Rays of grand clear light flew out from their secluded cultivation grounds and into the sky. Taoist Gong's expression was solemn as he looked at the sky. The person who came had not yet entered the realm, but the vast and deep qi dynamic had already descended. However, it was extremely obscure, as if there were endless changes within it, making it impossible for him to determine the specific cultivation level. He said in a deep voice, "There is a formation outside of Xianhong Heaven, and we did not notify in advance. How could someone break through the realm and come here?" He Xianin also arrived at this moment, and he said lightly, "Maybe the person who obtained the ancestral master's fate technique has arrived." Taoist Gong frowned and said, "Who is on duty in Xuantian recently?" A Jinren answered, "I remember that they are 2 disciples of Jinren Bai." Everyone's eyes turned to look at a middle-aged Taoist with a jade-like face and a light beard. The latter slowly said, "They are my disciples. These 2 people are usually very diligent, so there must be a reason for the mistake today. I'll summon them and ask them, and we'll know." He made a gesture, and after a short while, Xuantian's celestial apparatus flew over. The golden-robed Taoist and junior brother Quan came down from above, and when they came near, they respectfully greeted, "Master, Jinren True." Jinren Bai said, "Today, an outsider broke into the realm. Since the 2 of you are on duty, did you see how the person passed through the mystic barrier outside of the realm?" The golden-robed Taoist hurriedly told the truth about the situation just now. He lowered his head and said, "It is also disciples' negligence. Because the person is not from our realm, I thought that he would not be able to pass through the Yuju barrier. But for some reason, the barrier did not seem to stop this person. He was just in a trance, and he entered the heaven and earth realm pass, and he seemed to be guided by the Jade Kuan." When Jinren Wan heard this, his expression changed greatly. He raised his voice a little and said, "Jinren, true, to be able to pass through the Yuju barrier laid by the ancestral master, and to be guided by the Jade Kuan, the person must be the owner of the divine object." However, Jinren Gong said coldly, "Jinren Wan, be careful with your words. The teachings of the ancestral master are extremely important. Whether the person who came is the owner of the divine object, it is not yet a conclusion. I only know that at this moment, there is an outsider who trespassed into my Xianhong heaven, and I see that his qi dynamic is obscure, and the technique he practices seems to be very different from the teachings of the ancestral master. His identity, however, is still up for discussion." Jinren Wan frowned and said, "But with the Jade Kun leading the way, how do you explain this?" Jinren Gong snorted. This was indeed a hurdle that could not be avoided. The Jade Kun was also left by the great underworld ancestral master back then. The fact that it could guide the person here was enough to prove his identity. In fact, he also knew that what Jinren Wan said was right, but for some reason, he did not want the Xian stone to be taken by the person. At this moment, Jinren Bai said, "The ancestral master left behind many other branches, and there are many techniques that we have no way of knowing. Maybe this person is one of them. I'm afraid that the Yukun came out to help because they are from the same branch. This kind of thing has happened before, so there is no need to be surprised. In my opinion, it is better to report this matter to the headmaster and let him decide." Chapter 15:11. The matter of the Luo Mountain Monastery still needed Guru Xian Hong's decision, so everyone went to the cloud sky platform together. However, before they could reach the stage, a Taoist boy came down from above and said, "Esteemed guests, please wait a moment. Old Master has been in seclusion for the past few days and needs to activate the array. He won't be seeing any guests, so please return." Perfected Being Gong asked, "When will the sect master come out?" The Taoist boy replied, "Please forgive me for not knowing." Perfected Being Gong and Perfected Being Bai looked at each other. Guru Xian Hong's attitude was quite thought-provoking, but he probably didn't want to meet the outsiders. One of the perfected beings said, "There are still 10 years before the Yuzhen gathering. The sect master will come out of seclusion. Why don't we wait until then to discuss this matter?" Someone shook his head and said, "The outsiders will have Yukun to receive them. I'm afraid they will arrive within a year and a half, but we won't be able to wait for the sect master to come out." Perfected Being Gong said in a deep voice, "Then let's take advantage of the fact that the perfected beings are here to come up with a plan as soon as possible." Perfected Being Bai thought for a moment and said slowly, "How about this? Since the sect master wants to mobilize the formation, we will close the gate and ignore him. We will pretend that he doesn't exist." Everyone's expressions changed slightly. This could be considered a good plan. The divine object was in their Luo Mountain Monastery after all. They could close the formation or simply seal the mountain. That would be equivalent to cutting off the two sides' paths of communication. If the other party wanted the divine object, they wouldn't be able to find the entrance or the person. If they wanted to come in, they would have to attack the mountain gate. But if this person dared to do so, they wouldn't be polite and would have an excuse to deal with him. Perfected Being Gong denied in a deep voice, "This plan is not appropriate. If that person lures Yukun over to break into the mountain gate, will you stop him or not?" When the perfected beings heard this, they were in a difficult position. Yukun was left behind by the great underworld patriarch. Although he was only a servant, he was closer to the patriarch than they were. If he stood on the side of the intruder, it would be difficult to deal with him. Jinren Gong looked around and said, "Moreover, even if I can keep this person at the door, it's not like there aren't people in the heavens who are my enemies. If news of this gets out and this person uses this person, it will instead bring me great harm." When everyone heard this, they seemed to have thought of something, and their expressions changed. Someone immediately said, "That's right. We can't let this person be used by others. We need to make appropriate arrangements." He Xian-yin spoke up, "This little brother has an idea." Gong Jinren said, "I wonder what shitty his idea is." He Xian-yin said, "We don't have to treat this person harshly, but senior brother Gong said it well, this person's aura is obscure, his background is questionable, but we can't force him to tell us his background. In order to prevent the patriarch's divine object from falling into the hands of evil people, we can set up a few tests to verify his intentions. If this person can do it, he will be one of us, even if he gets the divine object, we can be at ease." Adept One couldn't help but say, "Then what if you can't do it?" He Xian-yin said indifferently, "Then that person is not fated with the divine item." Gong Jinren nodded, "That's right, if he is not fated, then he will not be the person the patriarch spoke of. You don't have to worry about this, Adept One." Adept One sighed in his heart. The patriarch only told them to guard the mystic stone and wait for the fated person to come, but he never said to set up any tests for the fated person. It wasn't something they should do. But now that Master Xian Hong was the leader of Mount Luo, even though he didn't say it explicitly, the meaning was revealed. As a member of the sect, how could he object? It was just that this method was indeed a difficult one for the outsider. Unless this person immediately fell out with Mount Luo and forced his way in, he could only follow their plan. Most of the perfected beings present thought this plan was feasible. After all, the mystic stone was in the hands of Mount Luo. Even if the person was the nominal owner of the object, they could try to delay and set up difficulties. After 1,000 years, there would be no problem. At this time, Adept Bai said, "Here, we need someone to take care of that person." Adept One is calm and is also the person guarding the mystic stone. He is suitable to deal with this person. Gong Jinren thought for a moment, nodded and said, "Adept One is indeed a suitable person." As he said this, he looked over, "But Adept One must remember, don't make any mistakes, otherwise it will be hard to explain to the sect master." Adept One had no choice but to bow and say, "Wan Rong will not disappoint the perfected being's trust." Seeing that he agreed, the perfected beings didn't say anything more. After a few more words, they dispersed. In the end, only Song Jinren and Wan Rong didn't leave. Song Jinren looked at the sky and sneered, "I'm afraid that person is not so easy to bully. I'm afraid this method will backfire." Adept One said, "Since Adept Song has a different view, why didn't you say anything just now?" Song Jinren mocked, "What's the use? Could it be that Adept One can't see that this is the sect master's intention? No matter what I say, it will only annoy people. It's better not to say anything." Adept One sighed and said, "The sect master is also considering for my Luo mountain lineage." Song Jinren clearly didn't agree with this, but he didn't say anything more about it. He only said, "Adept One, guarding the cave is not a job. It can be said that among us, you are the only one who is burdened by mundane affairs and can't focus on cultivation. Now that you've encountered such a thing, they want to push the blame onto you. If you do well, it's their idea, but if you don't do well, it's your dereliction of duty. Moreover, you've offended that person for no reason. Why did you come?" Adept Wan's eyes drooped and said, "I'm a cultivator of Luo Mountain, so I have to consider for the sect." Song Jinren sneered, "They don't care, but you do." Adept Wan said in a low voice, "The sect seems to be peaceful now, but in reality, there are dangers everywhere. If my fellow disciples aren't worried about this, why are you so anxious about the divine item?" Song Jinren sneered a few times and said, "Since you are willing, then it's up to you. I'm just being a busybody." He turned around and turned into a ray of light that disappeared into the sky. Adept One knew that since his fellow disciples had handed this matter to him, they would try their best to avoid meeting that person. Because he didn't know when that person would arrive, he simply used his magic power to form a cloud raft and waited here. About 100 days later, a gap suddenly appeared in the sky and a shuttle-shaped boat entered the inner realm. At the same time, a powerful aura filled the sky. The light of the sun and moon seemed to dim a bit. Enlightened Master Wan stood up from the cloud raft and sensed that the other party's magic power was unfathomable. His heart shuddered as well. He flew up and carefully arrived in front of the spirit boat. He cupped his hands and said loudly, "Fellow Taoist, may I know where you came from and why you came to my Xianhong heaven?" Zhang Yan noticed that although this person's aura was different from that of the Qinsang school cultivators, it was very similar. He knew that this person must be the guardian the great underworld patriarch mentioned. He came out from the boat and bowed back. "I'm Zhang Yan. I'm a cultivator of Qinsang school in the Kingdom of 9 Continents. I was instructed by my sect's patriarch to come here to find an item." Adept 1 checked again but didn't feel a similar aura from Zhang Yan. He was confused and asked, "May I ask what fellow cultivator's patriarch is?" Zhang Yan didn't hide it and said, "My Qinsang school's Tao was passed down by the great underworld patriarch." Adept 1 knew he was right and revealed a kind smile. "We are indeed from the same sect. I'm Luo Mountain Monastery's Wanrong sect. My sect has long known of fellow cultivators' arrival. However, the sect formation needs to be reorganized, so I was unable to leave. I specially ordered fellow cultivator to wait here. I hope fellow cultivator won't take offense." Zhang Yan smiled. "As long as you don't treat I as an unwelcome guest, it's fine." Adept 1 said, "Not at all. Although my Xianhong heaven has a place in the myriad heavens, it can't compare to those large sections. It's been a long time since we saw a fellow cultivator. I'm very happy to have fellow cultivator come to visit." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. "Myriad heavens, please forgive I for entering your sect. I don't understand. May I ask where this place is?" Adept 1 was slightly surprised. "Fellow cultivator, so you came from outside the myriad heavens. I didn't expect there to be a patriarch's Tao inheritance outside of this place." After letting out a sigh, he paused for a moment before continuing. "The so-called remnant heavens refers to the various heavens and realms within the Yuluo tribe. There are countless realms of various sizes here. Among them, there are 19 heavens as the supreme, and my Xianhong heaven is one of them. Every heaven realm has a heaven master, and my Luo Mountain sect leader is the heaven master of this realm." Zhang Yan asked, "What is the cultivation of your sect master?" Adept 1 said, "My sect master is at the second tribulation of enlightenment. He's not far from the third tribulation. After a cultivator severed the past and future, if they didn't have the opportunity to reach the true Yang realm, they would find a way to pass the tribulation of enlightenment. Once they passed the tribulation, their magic power would constantly increase. After 30,000 years of cultivation, a tribulation would descend. If they survived it, they would pass the first tribulation. At 60,000 years, another tribulation would descend. This was the second tribulation. At 120,000 years, they would pass the third tribulation. Based on this, they would experience the fourth tribulation after 240,000 years. Every time a cultivator passed a tribulation, their magic power would multiply. As long as they didn't fall under the tribulation, their magic power could be endlessly accumulated. Even so, they would never be able to step into the true Yang realm. Zhang Yan had read Taoist books in his sect and knew about this realm. Those who passed the tribulation of enlightenment couldn't be compared to true Yang cultivators, but they were many times stronger than people like Kong Ying. This Master Xianhong was close to the third tribulation and had cultivated for more than 100,000 years. This kind of magic power could be said to be earth-shattering. Next, he asked about various matters here and Adept 1 answered them one by one. However, he noticed that even though Adept 1 was friendly, he only greeted him as an ordinary fellow Taoist, and he didn't mention a single word about the treasure left behind by the great underworld founding ancestor. It was as if he was intentionally avoiding it. However, he was not in a hurry to investigate. At least, he needed to understand the situation here before he could take the next step. Chapter 15:12. While Adept 1 was greeting Zhang Yan, Adept Gong and Adept Bai were standing in a hidden pavilion in the mountain gate. They used the formation to look outside and paid extra attention to the conversation between the two. After hearing Zhang Yan talk about his background, Adept Bai thought for a moment and said, Qinsang School? Have you heard of this sect, Adept Gong? Adept Gong thought for a moment and shook his head. I know of all the branches in the Yuhuan heavens, but Qinsang School has never heard of it. It seems like it is as he said, he came from outside the Yuhuan heavens. Adept Bai said in a heavy voice, this person's cultivation method is profound and unpredictable. It's difficult to distinguish between the far and the far. It doesn't seem like the path of our generation. Adept Gong agreed and said, that's right. Last time, it already showed that the black stone has a spirit and will choose its own master. However, after this person entered the realm, there was no movement at all. There's clearly something strange about this. It seems that Junior Marshal Brother he is right. We can't be careless about this matter. We need to be cautious to prevent the Patriarch's inheritance from falling into the hands of outsiders. Adept Bai said, that's right. Otherwise, how can we be worthy of the Patriarch's trust? In fact, although the Black Stone didn't want to be taken by others, it might not take the initiative to find its master. Otherwise, why would the great underworld Patriarch send people to guard it? They might as well let it go. They didn't even need the fated person to come here to find it. However, due to some reason, the two of them were unwilling to hand over such a divine object, so they tried to find a reason. Adept Bai said at this moment, perhaps we should remind Adept Wan to try to find out what kind of cultivation method this person cultivates. If he is deliberately concealing it, then there's a big problem with his origin. Adept Gong said with certainty, don't worry, Adept Wan has a sense of propriety on such a big matter. We should know what to do. On the other side, Adept One understood that many of his fellow sect members didn't want to see Zhang Yan come into contact with the divine object, so he didn't welcome him to the mountain gate. Instead, he planned to arrange for him to stay outside the sect. On the way, Zhang Yan had been observing the surrounding scenery. This Xianhong heaven was similar to the mountain and sea realm. The land was boundless, and there were stars, sun, and moon in the sky. However, after talking with Adept Wan, he found out that in such a big world, there was only one power, the Luo Mountain Monastery. There were some small sects that had deep ties with the lower courtyards. He nodded and said, using one sect to control the heavens, powerful, and powerful. Your sect leader is indeed worthy of the title, Heavenly Lord. When Adept Wan heard this, he smiled bitterly and said, it's just that my Xianhong heaven is not a peaceful place. For example, esteemed Master Wei Ji of Jiaying Tian had a grudge with me because of an incident in his early years. This Heavenly Lord is someone who has passed 3 tribulations, and his cultivation is even higher than the sect leader. Fortunately, there is a formation outside Xianhong Heaven and the Jade Kun Guard, so he can't enter. However, if fellow Taoist goes to the outer world in the future and meets cultivators from this world, you must be careful. In fact, with the Jade Kun bewildering formation outside Xianhong Heaven, the Luo mountain lineage had no fear of external enemies. Not to mention the fact that they were here under the orders of the great underworld Patriarch to guard the Xian stone, no one would dare to offend the Patriarch and make things difficult for them. It was precisely because of this that the cultivators in the sect had always been very tough when dealing with outsiders. But then again, once the Xian stone was taken away, it was equivalent to announcing that their duty to guard it was over, and from then on, the two parties would no longer have anything to do with each other. But for the past 1,000,000 years, this divine object had long been their protective talisman. If it was suddenly gone, who knew how many enemies would appear, and it was very likely to cause a disaster. If they wanted to avoid it, they had to have a powerful cultivator, or use this object to form an alliance with a strong enough external help. They had long planned for this. Zhuang Tian Lord He Xianin was someone who had passed 3 tribulations, and was close to passing 4. If the two parties formed an alliance, then they would no longer have to worry about these things. Moreover, with the help of the Xian stone, He Xianin would be able to take that unprecedented step. But the arrival of Zhang Yan had completely disrupted their plans. Zhang Yan originally wanted to try and ask about the reason for the enmity between the two parties, but Venerable Wan's words were vague. He knew that Venerable One was unwilling to talk about it in detail. His eyes flickered slightly. Although there was no clear proof, he could feel that this matter was definitely related to the opportunity left behind by the great underworld patriarch. Thus, he did not pursue the matter any further. He smiled and said, "May I ask who has the highest cultivation in the Yuhuan all heavens?" Enlightened Master Wan replied, "In terms of cultivation, Tao, and cultivation, the Palace Master of the Green Jade Palace is the highest." This senior almighty had already obtained the fruit of Tao long before our heavens were divided and achieved the true Yang realm. Zhang Yan nodded inwardly when he heard this. There was indeed such a person in the all heavens. Venerable One then said, "Every 10,000 years, the Palace Lord of Emerald Jade Palace will hold a sermon. As long as one's cultivation has reached a certain level, they can go and listen to the sermon. At that time, not only our generation, but even the all heavens heaven lords will be present. It is one of the 3 great events of our Yuhuan all heavens." When Zhang Yan heard this, his interest was piqued. He asked, "May I know what are the other 2 great events?" Venerable One replied, "The other 2 great events are the Pearl Scattering Banquet and the Feast of Treasures. The Pearl Scattering Banquet is used to promote talented people of the younger generation. The host of this banquet is the Heaven Lord of Yehaitian, Ao Shao. This Heaven Lord is a true dragon that achieved Tao. It is rumored that he was the mount of a certain great virtue, and even the Palace Lord of Emerald Jade Palace is very polite to him. As for the Feast of Treasures, it is different. It is set up to make it convenient for the cultivators of the all heavens to exchange treasures and external medicines. You can find any precious treasures there. Fellow Taoist has come at the right time. The day of the Feast of Treasures is approaching, and it will only take a few hundred years at most. Fellow Taoist should go and take a look when the time comes. Perhaps you will be able to gain something." Zhang Yan smiled and nodded. "Since it is a all heavens event, I must go and take a look if I have time." The 2 of them talked for a long time. Venerable One felt that he had become more familiar with Zhang Yan. He pondered for a while and asked tentatively, "May I know which technique did you cultivate from the ancestral master?" After saying that, he quickly added, "If it is not convenient, just pretend that I never asked." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "There's nothing I can't say. There are many techniques passed down by the ancestral master, and all of them are profound and mysterious. However, my aptitude is average, so it's difficult for me to comprehend more. I've only cultivated one of them, and it's called the 9 Numbers Taisher Spiritual Treasure Mystic True Scripture. I wonder if fellow Taoist has any." "Oh, it is the 9 Numbers True Scripture." After hearing this, Venerable Wan's eyes unconsciously widened. He looked at Zhang Yan with a trace of admiration and said with emotion, "No wonder you came to my Xianhong heaven. This scripture is not something that ordinary people can cultivate. It must be known that although some techniques are extremely superior, they may not be very compatible with the person who cultivates them. When one first enters the path of cultivation, one may not feel anything, but once one cultivates to a high level, one's progress will be very slow and it will be difficult to move forward. This is because one has gone astray from the beginning, and later on, they will deviate further and further. At this point, it will be impossible to turn back and recultivate. If one can comprehend the 9 Numbers True Scripture early on, then one can deduce the cultivation method. This way, it will be more compatible with one's body, and there will be no need to worry." However, this cultivation technique was not that easy to cultivate. It was not that no one in the Xianhong Tian sect had tried it in the past, but most of their achievements were extremely limited. In the Luo Mountain Monastery, other than passing down the 9 Numbers True Scripture, the great underworld patriarch had also left behind more than 10 mysterious techniques. Since there was a better choice in front of him, why should he take this rugged path? As a result, over time, this method was no longer of interest. Venerable Wan was amazed. This person can cultivate this technique, how is his talent mediocre? He is clearly a genius. Thinking about it, how can a person who can obtain the opportunity left behind by the patriarch be simple? Perhaps it is because of this that the patriarch values him. When Zhang Yan saw that they were talking about this topic, he also took the opportunity to ask about the cultivation technique of the Luo Mountain Monastery in detail. However, he found that there were no 3 scriptures here, and all he knew was the 9 numbers true scripture. Although there are many other cultivation techniques, most of them are of the water attribute, completely unlike the Qinsang school, which has all 5 skills. He vaguely realized that this sect probably did not obtain the true inheritance of the patriarch. The two of them chatted along the way, and not long after, they arrived at a beautiful island that was surrounded by mountains and faced the sea. Outside the island, there were many dragons soaring in the clouds and swimming in the sky. The tide below was high, like hills rising out of the water. The waves surged over, causing jade waves to splash, and from time to time, a rainbow-colored ring of light could be seen. Venerable Wan said, "This is Starry Rainbow Island, a place where my Xian Hongtian welcomes our distinguished guests. I wonder if fellow Daoist is satisfied." Zhang Yan glanced over and saw that this place was rich with spiritual opportunity. It was a good place to cultivate, but he knew that the so-called distinguished guest in his words was just a joke. If the Luo Mountain Monastery really valued his arrival, then they should at least welcome him inside the monastery, and blocking the door was not proper etiquette. However, he had no intention to fuss about this, so he smiled and said, "This place is very good, thank you, fellow Daoist." Venerable Wan's heart relaxed, and he said, "Then fellow Daoist, please rest here for the time being. I need to report your arrival to the sect. I'll come and visit you again in a few days." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Do as you wish, fellow Daoist." Venerable Wan bowed, then turned around and flew into the sky. Zhang Yan descended and landed in the pavilion on the peak. Suddenly, there was a flash of light, and a spirit appeared. It was a middle-aged scholar, and he said respectfully, "I'm the manager of this place, do you have any orders, esteemed guest?" Zhang Yan glanced at him and said, "You heard that fellow Daoist one once said that you have a heavenly local annals here, can I have a look?" The middle-aged scholar hesitated, but he did not dare to refuse, and said, "Yes, I'll go get it now." After the person left, Zhang Yan looked at the sky. From the moment he entered the world, he felt that someone was spying on him. He smiled faintly, and with a wave of his sleeve, a ball of qi surged and covered his figure. At the same time, Venerable Gong and Venerable Bai felt their vision blur, and they could no longer see anything. They frowned unconsciously. Venerable Gong said in a deep voice, "This person's qi is obscure, it's really hard to see through." Venerable Bai said, "No matter how capable he is, as long as we follow Venerable He's method and set up a few tests, he will naturally reveal himself." Venerable Gong looked over and said, "Oh, Venerable Bai, do you have an idea?" Venerable Bai chuckled and said, "There's no harm in doing this first." He transmitted his voiceover, and Venerable Gong repeatedly nodded and said, "All right, we'll do as Venerable Bai says first." Chapter 15:13. After Spiritual Master Wan returned to the treasure cavern, he went to the depths of the cave and looked at the profound stone. He saw that the light on it was even brighter than before, and it would buzz and tremble from time to time. He couldn't help but have a complicated expression, and he sighed. If you escape to find the owner just like this, then the fellow Taoists in the sect won't have to worry about you anymore. After he finished speaking, he saw that the profound stone was still quietly floating there without any movement. He felt slightly disappointed in his heart, but at the same time, he heaved a sigh of relief. He sat down cross-legged and sat there motionlessly as usual. After an unknown amount of time, a boy's voice came from outside the cave. "Master, Gong Shengzhen and Bai Shengzhen sent a disciple over. They said they'd like to invite Master over for a chat." Spiritual Master Wan said, "I understand. Tell them I'll go in a moment." He stood up, and before he left, he once again inspected the restrictions in this place. This array could only block the outside but not the inside. It could not restrict the divine objects in any way, but outsiders without his permission and the headmaster's decree would absolutely not be able to enter. He walked to the outside and boarded a flying carriage. He went into the profound room and sat down on the jade couch, letting the driver in front of him ride on the cloud. Not long after, the flying carriage shook slightly, and the driver said, "Shangjin, we've arrived at the earth boundary." Spiritual Master Wan got up and came out, but he had already arrived on an island in the clouds. The cloud cranes flew away, and clear sounds could be heard. Looking down, the land was boundless and incomparably vast. In comparison, this place was like a drop in the ocean. However, this floating island was actually very large. There were 5 mountains, 8 lakes, and more than 100 temples on it. The people who lived there were all disciples and clansmen of this line under Spiritual Master Bai. At this moment, a cultivator in embroidered robes was already standing there to welcome them. He took a few steps forward, bowed, and said, "Shangjin Wan, please come in. My master and Gong Shangjin are waiting inside." Spiritual Master Wan said, "Lead the way." The embroidered-robed cultivator immediately led the way, leading them all the way to a mountain gorge with clear spring water and warm mist flowing from it. Gong and Bai, 2 people, were sitting on a green lotus leaf. A golden incense burner was emitting dense mist. Between the water and the sky, auspicious clouds were faintly discernible, giving off the demeanor of an immortal. Seeing Spiritual Master Wan's arrival, the 2 smiled and stood up to greet him. Then, Spiritual Master Bai made a hand seal, and a lotus leaf floated over, inviting him up. He then waved the lotus tail in his hand, and a cool breeze blew over, blowing the leaf into the depths of the lake. After a few polite words, the 3 of them sat down. Spiritual Master Gong Shangjin Gong. Gong didn't beat and went straight to the point, and said, "Spiritual Master, do you think this person is the owner of the divine item?" Adept Wang was silent for a while before saying, "Since it's the ancestral master's inheritance, how can I make a rash conclusion?" Spiritual Master and Master. Shangjin Master. Shangjin, Master to, and said to Mountain, Ren, of sea to. Spiritual Master Bai said, "I discussed it with Spiritual Master Gong and asked Spiritual Master Wan to do this." As he said this, he transmitted his voiceover. Spiritual Master Wan was shocked when he heard this. After a while, he said, "I will follow this rumor, but it's hard to say whether Spiritual Master Zhang will agree or not." Although he didn't agree with the 2's arrangement, he was still a disciple of the Luo Mountain Temple. For the benefit of the sect, he still decided to act according to this plan. Spiritual Master Gong Shangjin Gong's eyes revealed an indescribable brilliance, and he said, "If he really came to take the divine item, then I believe he will agree." Spiritual Master Bai smiled and said, "If he doesn't agree, it doesn't matter. We won't force people." After staying in the guest house, Zhang Yan didn't go sightseeing. He spent the next few days reading the local records of the heavens. After all, this was a place where the heavens communicated frequently. There were many things that he had never heard of or seen before. Moreover, he also noticed many things. One of them was that in the Yuhuan heavens, besides Xian Heng Tian, there were many sects that were passed down or related to the great underworld patriarch. There were 2 sects that deserved the most attention. It was said that they were passed down by the great underworld patriarch's disciple, Spiritual Master Sunyu. He had never heard of Spiritual Master Sunyu. After all, the great underworld patriarch had only stayed in the 9 continents for 100 years. He didn't talk much about himself, and some things were only known to the sect leader. He flipped through the records about this person and found that he didn't talk much. However, the local records mentioned that the palace master of Green Jade Palace had sent his eldest disciple, Dugu Hang, to invite him to the palace to discuss Tao. This showed that this spiritual master's cultivation was definitely not shallow. Speaking of which, if this person was indeed the disciple of the great underworld patriarch, then he should be the same disciple as the 3rd-generation sect leader of Qinsang School, Yuan Zhongzi. He thought to himself, if there's a chance, I should pay a visit to these 2 sections. Next, he looked at the rest of the sects. The founders of these sects either listened to the Tao under the patriarch, or were the registered disciples of the patriarch, or simply obtained the cave abode that the patriarch left behind when he traveled the Yuhuan heavens. If one looked closely, they couldn't be considered as a proper inheritance. And in the local records, the Xianhong Heaven Luoshan Monastery said that they were the orthodox sect, and called the rest of the sects as a side branch. Although it was slightly contemptuous, it was not completely nonsense. It also had some confidence. After all, whether it was the sects or the techniques, they were all passed down by the great underworld patriarch. Compared to the other sects, they could indeed be considered orthodox. However, he also found a problem here. All the sects that obtained the inheritance would try to state their own master. This was something that could not be ignored. For example, the orthodoxy passed down by Venerable Sun Yu was like this. However, the Luoshan monastery was very secretive about this, as if they didn't want others to know. Regarding this, he couldn't help but have a guess in his heart. He needed to find a way to verify it in the future. If he used it well, it might be a breakthrough point. In the blink of an eye, another few days passed. On this day, when he was holding a demon mirror in his hand, the formation spirit suddenly appeared, bowed, and said, "Venerable One is here." Zhang Yan put down the book and said, "Please come in." Not long after, Venerable One slowly walked in, and after coming up to greet them, they each sat down. He said, "I have already reported your arrival to the sect, but I have to ask one thing. You said that you came under the guidance of the patriarch, but what did the patriarch say?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Without the permission of the patriarch, please forgive I for not being able to tell others." Venerable One bowed and said, "I have been rude." He pondered for a while and said, "I won't hide it from you. We have been guarding this item for nearly 1,000,000 years under the orders of the patriarch, and we have never seen anyone come to take it. Although our knowledge of you is limited, we can't just hand it over with a few words. That would be letting down the patriarch's trust." Zhang Yan glanced at him and said with a smile, "Then what do you want?" He didn't believe that outsiders could take away the item passed down by the great underworld patriarch. Even if he didn't talk about Yukuan's attitude towards him, as long as Mount Luo Monastery was willing to open the mountain gate and let him in for a little contact, it wouldn't be hard to come up with a conclusion. However, this person didn't mention this method at all, and instead looked for excuses. It was obvious that he didn't want to take it out. However, he already knew this and also had a way to deal with it, so he didn't say it out loud. Venerable One said, Venerable One, we don't want to make things too difficult for you. We just want to ask you to do a few things to test your sincerity. If you succeed, we will naturally hand the item over to you." Zhang Yan said, "What kind of things?" Venerable One said, "The first thing is that there's a place in my Black Flood Tianxia realm called Mount Klayan. There's a fierce demon that's entrenched there and often comes out to wreak havoc in the human world. However, he's skilled in escape techniques and seems to have the ability to predict the future. Every time someone tries to capture him, he escapes first. Can I ask you to eliminate him on my behalf?" As he spoke, he raised his head and looked over. There was actually a hidden trap here. Mount Klayan looked like a fierce demon on the surface, but only the upper echelons of Mount Luo Monastery just now knew that he was the adopted son of Venerable Guanji who had accumulated years of victories. This was a nail that Venerable Guanji had deliberately buried here. If not for this, how could the dozen or so Venerable Luo Monastery fail to capture him? They just didn't want to give this person an excuse, so they allowed him to roam freely in the lower realm. But if Zhang Yan took action, it would be different. He wasn't from Mount Luo, so he naturally had a way to prevent Venerable Guanji from blaming them. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This demon must have some ability to survive under the noses of your esteemed sect for so long. I can't promise you before I know the details of this demon." Venerable One said, "That's a matter of course. I'll order someone to send over all the information regarding this demon later." Gong and Bai had long considered this. If Zhang Yan wasn't willing to agree, then they could use this as an excuse to withhold the profound stone. If they agreed and succeeded, it would be beneficial to them. Moreover, Zhang Yan had unknowingly offended Venerable Guanji, and his life would be in danger. Even if his luck was good and he successfully passed this trial, this wasn't the end. There was still the next trial waiting for him, and one after another, he wouldn't be able to take the stone away. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "After I read it, I will give you an answer." Venerable One said good, paused, and then said, "This matter isn't urgent. You can slowly consider it." After a few more words, he took his leave. After seeing him off, Zhang Yan began to ponder. He didn't need to guess to know that there must be something wrong. The other party had set up a trap for him to jump into, so he needed to be extra cautious when dealing with this matter. It was a pity that the great underworld patriarch had only instructed him to take the divine object, and there was nothing that could directly prove his identity. Otherwise, he could just take the object and leave. If the Luo Mountain Monastery didn't want to betray the patriarch, they couldn't stop him. However, even if there was such an object, it wasn't suitable to take it out at this time. He deduced that the object left behind by the patriarch was probably related to the path of true yang. Even if he obtained it now, he wouldn't be able to use it immediately. Instead, it would attract people's attention. Instead of that, it was better to leave it in the Luo Mountain Monastery and let it be safeguarded for him. He might as well use the external medicine's spiritual opportunity here and the experience of the predecessors to find a way to improve his cultivation and strengthen himself. As for how to obtain the object, he already had a plan in mind. However, the time wasn't right yet, so he had to wait patiently. Chapter 15-14. Inside the pavilion, Zhang Yan pondered for a while, then took out a jade tablet with a glossy surface from his sleeve. He lifted it up, and it floated up under the support of the clear air. He then took out a jade mallet and struck it. With a buzzing sound, a layer of jade-colored light like a cocoon spread out in all directions, and in an instant, the entire hall was shrouded in light. He raised his hand and flicked his fingers at the light cover. Rays of clear light shot out, and every time the light hit, a talisman pattern would appear on it, flowing and flickering on its surface. This was a concealment instrument that he brought from the sect to prevent outsiders from peeping. The more Fa Li he sent in, the more talisman there would be on it, and the tighter the defense would be. It was not convenient for the people of the Luo Mountain Monastery to know what he was going to do, so he had to make such an arrangement. However, if there was a true young almighty who wanted to peep, then he would not be able to guard against it. However, there was no need for such a person to keep an eye on him. Moreover, there was a great underworld patriarch's arrangement outside Xianhong Heaven, so it was not easy to break in. After about 1,000 talisman patterns, he felt that it was enough, so he stopped. He took out the dual realm dial and pressed it with his hand. However, this time, the instrument only trembled slightly, and the spiritual light on it seemed to be blocked by an invisible barrier. It only flickered slightly, but could not appear as usual. He nodded, as he had expected this. He took out the Duzhen Hall Master's jade seal and activated it slightly. In an instant, the invisible force retreated like a receding tide, and the spiritual light that was originally suppressed also gushed out. After a while, sect leader Qin's figure appeared and gradually became clearer. Zhang Yan bowed and said, "Greetings, sect leader spiritual master." Sect leader Qin looked at him up and down, then nodded and said with a pleasant expression, "Did Hall Master Duzhen's trip back go smoothly?" Zhang Yan replied, "I followed the patriarch's instructions and successfully arrived at the place where the opportunity is." Next, he told sect leader Qin about the situation in the Yuhuan Heavens, and emphasized that Luo Mountain Monastery had set up obstacles to make it difficult for him to touch the divine object. Finally, he said, although Luo Mountain Monastery claims to have inherited the patriarch's teachings, the inheritance is vague, and the lineage is unclear. I think I can find a loophole here. Sect leader Qin thought for a moment and said, "No matter which sect, the teachings of the master are extremely important. It has always been stated clearly, and there is no reason to be vague. This person claims to be a disciple of the great underworld patriarch. If he does not want others to know, then it is either the patriarch intentionally, or the origin is unclear, and the name is not clear." Zhang Yan said, "Everyone knows that Luo Mountain Monastery is guarding the divine object for my patriarch, and this person also uses this name to intimidate everyone, and claims to be an orthodox sect. If this is really the case, then it should have been publicized long ago, and there is no need to hide it. Therefore, I think that this person is just faking this name, and I need to find an opportunity to verify it. For any sect, if the name of the patriarch was faked, or if the person was clearly not an orthodox disciple, but still insisted on clinging to the patriarch, then all the successors in the heavens and realms would have the right to ask for an explanation. Sect leader Qin said, "What does Hall Master Duzhen want to do?" Zhang Yan replied, "I want to propose paying respects to the patriarch at the right time, and I hope sect leader Qin will grant me this right. If he refuses, then he is definitely not a disciple of the patriarch, and this person has no right to stop me." Asking to open an altar to pay respects to the patriarch was not something that could be done by just anyone. It had to be a disciple of the Orthodox sect, and what was the Orthodox sect? The legacy was passed down, and the inheritance was continuous. There was a record of each generation, and the order of seniority was also traceable. In Qinsang school, only the sect leader Zhenren had this right, but he was one of the 3 hall masters, and if he had the sect leader's permission, he could also do this. Sect leader Qin thought for a moment, and said with a slightly solemn expression, "I approve this request. From now on, if Hall Master Du Jin meets someone whose inheritance is unclear, but who falsely claims to be a disciple of the patriarch, then you can open an altar to set up a sacrifice, and there is no need for another report." Zhang Yan bowed and said, "Disciple thanks sect leader Qin for his trust." After a few more words of discussion, he ended the conversation with sect leader Qin, and put away the two-realm dial again. Once the right to open an altar to pay respects to the patriarch was in his hands, it was equivalent to holding a big killer move. Once it was proven that the Luo Mountain sect was not a descendant of the great underworld patriarch, then the so-called test would be unreasonably difficult. How could a sect that was not even a branch have the right to order a disciple of the Orthodox sect? However, if this was really done, it would also force the Luo Mountain sect into a corner. After all, the patriarch was powerful, and it was on his own territory. Even if he was stripped of his bright coat, there would always be a way to deal with him. Therefore, unless there was no other way, he was not ready to take this step. Now he was thinking that since the situation could not be solved from the inside, then he would try to find a way from the outside. The reason why the Luo Mountain sect dared to set obstacles for him was that he had just arrived, had no foundation, and was not strong enough. The power he could use was very limited, and even if he turned hostile, he would not be too much of a threat to them. But if he could make a name for himself in the heavens and have the help of all his fellow Taoists, then when the time came and talked to them about obtaining the divine object, it would be enough to put great pressure on them, and his chances of success would be much higher. At least, they would not dare to randomly find such flimsy excuses to obstruct him. To achieve this, he could not be bound by the rules of the Luo Mountain sect, nor could he follow the path arranged by them. Instead, he had to find a way to go out, either to visit or to make friends. For example, the sects related to the great underworld patriarch were natural allies with him. This generation had never been favored by the Luo Mountain sect and was often criticized by the Luo Mountain sect for being a branch. But as a true disciple, he could communicate with them, and if necessary, he could even give them talismans and gold discs to bring them into the Qinsung faction. In this way, he could straighten out their name. In addition, if he wanted to achieve his goal, he had to do something that was worthy of praise from all heavens. A few days ago, when he was reading the annals of all heavens, he discovered something interesting. Just as Taoist One had said, the Yuhuan heavens was not a place of peace. There were many demons and devils, many of which were on the same level as the mountain and sea realm's ghost ancestor. As a power that stood above all heavens, the Green Jade Palace would often send out edicts to various sects or people with profound cultivation bases to exterminate these demons. Because these edicts targeted demons the most, the people of all heavens called them the Demon Extermination Edicts. As long as the cultivators who received the edicts completed the task mentioned in the edicts, the Green Jade Palace would reward them handsomely. However, the higher the reward, the more dangerous it would be. Sometimes, because the demons and devils were too powerful, cultivators from several sects would need to join forces. Just now, they dared to go. Over the past million years, there had been many orthodox sects that had been destroyed due to failure. On the other hand, if something that seemed impossible was suddenly accomplished by someone, then that person would immediately enter the eyes of the various forces, and their reputation would even be praised in the all heavens. For example, He Xianyin from Mount Luo Monastery. He had severed his past and future body after cultivating for 3,000 years, but at first no one knew about it. After all, it was impossible for Mount Luo Monastery to publicize this matter, as it would be suspected of boasting and showing off. Later, because he received a demon extermination edicts, he used a stratagem to kill a fierce demon that was extremely difficult to deal with. Only then did his name spread throughout the heavens, and he was praised by everyone. Speaking of which, it was also thanks to this person that the records of the demon-subduing edict were so detailed. Xian Hongtian had always had few juniors who were well known outside. Now that such a person had appeared, how could it not be noted? What Zhang Yan planned to do, apart from making friends, was to choose this place as the next breakthrough point. Unfortunately, there was no detailed description of the demon extermination edicts, and there were no written records of the past. If one wanted to read it, he would have to go to the Qinghua Heaven under the Green Jade Palace. Once there, he would be able to get a glimpse of it. However, if he wanted to go there, he would first have to find someone who was familiar with the way. Different realms had different rules. If there was a misunderstanding because he was not clear about it beforehand, it would cause some unnecessary trouble. Although his cultivation was so high that he could ignore most of the restrictions and customs, and he was not afraid of offending people, if he respected others, they would respect him in return. Everything could be solved in a certain way, so he should try his best to do it. If he took a detour, even if he succeeded, it would be easy for others to criticize him. After sorting out these thoughts, he sat down with his legs crossed. No matter what choice he made in the future, he still had to rely on his own strength. The higher his cultivation, the more choices he could make, and the easier it would be for him to do things. With a thought, he activated his demonic nature and communicated with that side of the world. Suddenly, he disappeared from the pavilion, and when he reappeared, he was already in the land where he found the strength Dao root fruit. Looking at the world in front of him that was filled with scarlet rocks, he thought, looks like it's not bad. Even in the Yuhuan heavens, I can still travel to this red land. This time, he did not use the seal passed down by the great underworld patriarch, but he was able to pass through the formation barrier and enter this place without any obstruction. This was enough to show how powerful the master behind the devil treasury was. After finding the strength Dao root fruit, even if he did not deliberately cultivate, his magic power would increase at any time. If he cultivated here, the speed would naturally increase a lot. If he wanted to improve further, there was another way, and that was to find demons, and he could refine as many as he could find. The world is divided into clear and turbid, and the Yuhuan heavens is so big, it's impossible that there are no places where demons gather. There are indeed a few strange and dangerous places in the local records, but most of them are not detailed. If I can go to the Qinghua heavens this time, I have to pay more attention to these places. This time, he was only trying to see if he could escape here. The Wanjin people could come at any time, so he did not stay for long before turning back. He landed in the pavilion again. He looked around, and with a shake of his sleeve, he put away the concealment magic tool and walked out. Chapter 15:15. In front of the pavilion, a servant boy saw Zhang Yan coming out and bowed, saying, "Shang Zhen, just now, there's a jade letter delivered to you, asking for Shang Zhen to take a look." Zhang Yan stopped in his tracks and said, "Let me take a look." The servant boy quickly took out the jade letter, bent over, and placed both hands on top of it. Zhang Yan took it and opened it. It was a letter of greeting, and at the end of it, it was written, Song Wuwei. These days, not only did he read the local records, he also tried to understand the Luo mountain monastery that he was about to deal with. This Song Wuwei was one of the 10 Shangjin of the monastery under the sect master, and he had also cultivated to the second stage, a cultivator who had cut off his past body. He suddenly had a feeling that this person might be of help to him, so he took out a jade talisman from his sleeve and handed it to him, saying, "Send this talisman to fellow Taoist Song's abode. If he comes, quickly report to me." The servant boy said respectfully, "I'll remember." Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and dismissed him. He then walked to the front of the pavilion. There was a clear stream here, and there were many beautiful flower petals drifting down from the upper reaches. If that was all, it would be normal. Every petal had an inscription carved on it, but the content was obscure, making it impossible for anyone to understand its meaning. He looked up and saw a tall mountain. The peak of the mountain was shrouded by a ball of hazy clouds. With his cultivation, it was easy for him to force his way through, but since he was here as a guest, it was not appropriate for him to do so. Thus, he said, "Men." There was a flash of light, and the array spirit appeared, bowed and said, "Shang Zhen, do you have any orders?" Zhang Yan raised his sleeve and pointed upwards. "What's the upper reaches of this place?" The formation spirit took a look and replied, "Shang Zhen, this place used to be the yard of a spiritual master with the surname Yuan. However, this spiritual master didn't have any descendants. Back then, he only kept some strange monsters that were captured from the outer world. After the spiritual master reincarnated, these strange monsters stayed here for his sake. Over the years, they have all died off. Only an old bull named Crooked Horse is still there. Because it is honest, the immortal masters in the sect let it live out its retirement here. If it disturbs Shang Zhen, I will teach it a good lesson or drive it out." Zhang Yan was slightly moved as he asked, "In that case, this old bull isn't from Xian Hongtian?" The formation spirit replied, "Yes." Zhang Yan nodded and took another look at the clouds on the mountain peak. His gaze was deep and profound. He didn't ask any more questions and admired the beautiful scenery along the river for a while before returning to the pavilion to cultivate. On the second day, the child came to report that Spiritual Master Song had arrived. Zhang Yan ordered, "Invite Spiritual Master Song in." After the boy left to pass on the order, he sat for a while and then came out of the hall. He came to the door of the hall and waited for a while. Soon, he saw a handsome Taoist with a jade hairpin in his hair walk in. Zhang Yan raised his hand and bowed, "This must be Taoist Song, I greet you." Spiritual Master Song looked at him and bowed back, "I dare not, Taoist Zhang is greeting me." Zhang Yan smiled and turned around, "Taoist, please come in and talk." The two entered the room and sat down. The formation spirit came up to serve them tea. Taoist Song waited for the teacup to be set up. He picked it up and took a sip before putting it down. He said, "I came here to say one thing." His gaze focused on Zhang Yan's face. "Fellow Taoist, you really shouldn't have come here." Zhang Yan's expression was normal as he said, "Oh, why do you say that? Can you tell me the reason?" Spiritual Master Song stared at him and said, "Do you know that before you came, the sect was preparing to use the divine item to make a fuss? Our sect's spiritual master he could have used it to reach the sky in one step and our Luo Mountain Monastery could have avoided a calamity. But because of you, this plan didn't come to fruition. Our Luo Mountain Monastery might even have gained an enemy because of this. If that's the case, how would the people of our Luo Mountain Monastery be willing to hand over the divine item to you?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If not for this, would you have smoothly handed the divine item to I?" Spiritual Master Song chuckled and said with a hint of self-mockery, "I don't think they were willing. After all, they've guarded it for millions of years and have long regarded it as their own." He stood up and said, "There are many pros and cons to this. You're only one person after all. Don't let this delay you." After saying that, he cupped his hands and said no more. He turned around and left. Zhang Yan sent him off with a pensive look on his face. He could see the true intentions of this person. He was clearly here to advise him, but in reality, he was deliberately revealing a lot of information to him. However, why did he do this? This was something worth pondering. It was very likely that this information was not difficult to obtain. Even if the other party did not tell him, he would learn about it sooner or later. However, the significance of being informed in advance was different. If he feared the power of Mount Luo Monastery and wanted to retreat, there would naturally be less conflict. But if he had some means to force the Mount Luo Monastery to submit, or if the two sides were to fight in the future, it could be considered as leaving him some face here in advance. However, he had already made up his mind. No matter what the other party did, as long as they did not openly fight, it would not affect him much. After thinking about it, he waved his sleeves, got up, and returned to the inner chamber. He continued to meditate. A few days later, while he was sitting and observing, he suddenly sensed something. His eyes flashed, and a cloud of mist suddenly flew in from outside. He saw a strange face rushing left and right, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not get out. Seeing that the mist was shrinking, the strange face revealed a look of panic and begged for mercy. Please spare me, please spare me. I have no ill intentions. I'm only here to deliver a letter. Zhang Yan made the mist dissipate a little, and said calmly, Who are you, and who are you delivering the letter for? The ghost face said, Please forgive me for not knowing your name, master. I was ordered to come here to tell you something. Zhang Yan did not say anything, but looked at it calmly. The ghost face quivered, and did not dare to hesitate. The space between its eyebrows opened, and a curtain of light shone down, on which many words flashed. Zhang Yan looked at it. It was talking about what spiritual master Song had said not long ago, but it was more detailed, and the cause and effect were clearly explained, as if everything had happened personally. After the ghost face released the light, its eyes became dull. When the light faded, its body trembled, and turned into green smoke. In a few breaths, it completely disappeared, leaving no trace from beginning to end. Zhang Yan did not do anything. This was an arrangement made by the owner of the letter. This person's skills were not weak, and there were only a few people in Xianhong Heaven who could do such a thing. As for the purpose, there were too few clues, and it was still unclear. He thought to himself, so Mount Luo Monastery originally arranged for He Xianyin to be Taoist companions with the heavenly daughter of Zhuang, and the two of them would work together on the divine item. This way, even without the title of guarding the divine item, with heavenly daughter of Zhuang as an ally, they could still ensure the peace of Xianhong Heaven. If He Xianyin was lucky enough to achieve something with this item, there would be no need to fear external enemies. This was a good plan, but it was a pity that he was not the fated person like the founding master said, and was destined to not get the item. Otherwise, the mystic stone would not have returned to its owner after it was taken out. Spiritual Master Song had mentioned He Xianyin previously, and did not mention the matter with heavenly daughter of Zhuang. It seemed that they were from the same sect, and so he stopped there. While he was thinking, the child outside the door said, Shangzhen, Wanjin is here. Zhang Yan raised his head and said, Please come in. Not long after, Venerable Wan walked in. After greeting him, Venerable Wan sat down and handed him a jade slip. He said, This contains all the records related to Mountain Lord Che Yen. Venerable Wan can take a look. Zhang Yan accepted it, glanced at it, and put it to the side. He said with a smile, I heard that you want to do a few things for I, but I don't know how many. Can you give me a specific number so that I can have a plan? This, Wanjin Jinren could not help but hesitate. Mount Luo Monastery had come up with these excuses to make things difficult for Zhang Yan. But if they were to give an accurate list of the specific things, and if the spiritual master really succeeded, then wouldn't they be trapped in a cocoon of their own making? This was not his groundless worry. Zhang Yan was a fated person who was guided here by the great underworld patriarch. Who knew if he had some powerful tricks up his sleeves? Seeing his troubled appearance, Zhang Yan became even more certain of his judgment. He smiled and said, If it's not possible, it's fine. I was just asking casually. Wanjin Jinren sighed in relief, cupped his hands, and said, Thank you for your understanding, fellow Taoist. There are some things that I cannot decide on my own. He paused, then said, But when I return, I will think of a way to convince my fellow sect members and give you a definite answer. Zhang Yan's expression was carefree. He said, It's fine. In a few days, it's very likely that I will go to the hiding place of that vicious demon to investigate. It's just that I'm not one of your people, so it's inconvenient for me to come and go. Do you have a letter of communication with me? Wanjin Jinren was very generous this time. He said, I've already prepared it for you. He took out a jade disc from his sleeve and handed it over. Zhang Yan took the jade disc and looked at it a few times. Wanjin Jinren had given it to him so easily. This item was probably not as simple as a letter of communication. It also had the function of monitoring his whereabouts at any time. However, this was not a problem. He did not plan to do anything within the sphere of influence of Xianhong Heaven. Once he went beyond the heavens, he would not need this item anymore. Wanjin Jinren saw that all the items had been delivered and said his goodbyes. Zhang Yan did not urge him to stay and stood up to send him off. Then, he returned to his residence and sat down. He picked up the jade slip and scanned it with his consciousness. The records inside were extremely detailed. It included Mountain Lord Che Yan's cultivation time, his cultivation progress, what kind of divine abilities he had, what kind of strength he had, and where he usually lived. However, now that he understood Mount Luo Monastery's goal, he naturally would not continue down this path. Because continuing on this path was destined to be fruitless. As for the information on this jade slip, it was not without value. At the very least, it let him know that there was definitely something wrong with this Mountain Lord Che Yan. If he were to meet him in the future, he would have a good idea. On the other hand, in the lower realm where Mountain Lord Che Yan resided, there was a side branch that Mount Luo Monastery mentioned. He could take this opportunity to pay a visit. Chapter 15-16. Zhang Yan didn't plan to stay in Xianhong Heaven for too long. After receiving Enlightened Master Wan's letter, he prepared to leave. But before that, he had to do something. After learning that there was a demon bull living in the upper reaches of the river, he took the opportunity to learn more about it. He found that this demon had followed its master to travel around for thousands of years. After thinking about it, he felt that this demon was very familiar with the Yuhuan heavens. If he could make use of it, it would be much more convenient to travel between the heavens. With this thought, he summoned the formation spirit and said, since the demon bull on the mountain has no master, how about handing it over to I? The formation spirit was startled and replied, I can't make the decision, but I can ask the sect steward on behalf of Shangzhen. He should be able to give Shangzhen an answer. Zhang Yan nodded and said, then go, I will wait here for your reply. The formation spirit bowed and said, I'll be right back. With a flash of light, it disappeared from the main hall. Not long after, the formation spirit came back and said with some embarrassment, Shangzhen, I've already asked, but the steward said that even if the demon bull is useless, Luo Mountain Monastery has raised it for so many years for nothing. We can't let anyone take it away so easily. Zhang Yan smiled and said, that makes sense. I won't take something from your sect for free. With a flick of his sleeve, 3 bottles of pills flew out. Take these pills to your sect steward. The formation spirit hurriedly said, Enlightened Master, please wait. He called a boy over and told him to bring the pills to the steward. This time, it took several hours before the formation spirit received a reply. He immediately came to report to Zhang Yan and said, Shangzhen, the steward has agreed. Shangzhen can take the demon bull away at any time. As he spoke, he took out a golden ring. This is a bull taming instrument. If it doesn't listen, you can use it to teach it a lesson. Zhang Yan did not think that there would be such a thing. He took it and looked at it. He immediately knew how to use it. He waved his sleeves and ordered the true formation spirit to retreat. He then left the main hall and rode a cloud upstream. When he reached the peak of the mountain, he gently pushed the cloud away and revealed a fine house. In front of the open space in front of the door, a navy blue 2-headed bull was sleeping soundly. As if it noticed the fog had dispersed, one of the heads opened its eyes lazily. When it saw Zhang Yan, it revealed a surprised expression and slowly got up. It lowered its eyes and said, Shangzhen isn't from Luo Mountain Monastery, right? What are you doing here? What orders do you have for me? Zhang Yan looked at him and knew that he was used to being disciplined by his sect, so he said, you must be that Chu Zhao. I'm going to go beyond the heavens, so I'm lacking someone who knows the way. I heard that you've traveled the heavens before, so I made a deal with the steward of your sect and asked for you. From now on, you'll be following me. Chu Zhao immediately became spirited and said, so, I can leave this place. Zhang Yan nodded and said, yes. Chu Zhao was very happy and bowed down, then from now on, Shang Zhen is my master. Zhang Yan didn't take out the golden ring when he saw that Qin was very tactful. He summoned the skyscraper vessel that was left on the cloud platform and said, do you have anything to pack? Make some preparations, and we'll be departing soon. Chu Zhao seemed to think of something and said hurriedly, Master, please wait for a moment. It stomped its 4 hooves on the ground, and its 2 heads touched the ground with the tips of its horns one after another. Immediately, there was a rumbling sound. After a short while, a stone house that was 10 feet wide and shaped like an altar rose from the ground. Zhang Yan looked at it and asked, what is this? Chu Zhao said, Shang Zhen, before Zhenren Ruan reincarnated, he left a lot of things in it. He said that if Shang Zhen was willing to take care of me, he would give them to him as a reward. But once the Zhenren passed away, the tea cooled after he left. No one has ever asked me. Since I am leaving this time, I might as well give these to Shang Zhen. Zhang Yan's interest was immediately piqued. He landed on the ground and gently pushed the stone door. The door silently retreated. He walked into the room and looked around. Although the stone room wasn't big, it was spacious inside. It was filled with all kinds of strange things. There were feathers, scales, fur, shellfish, and vine leaves. There were also many rare items. Many of them should be top-notch treasures, but they were left here with no one interested in them. He thought that this Zhenren Ruan seemed to be indifferent and didn't have any close friends. Otherwise, he wouldn't be like this. He turned his eyes again and saw a row of jade slips in the corner. He reached out and took it. His mind turned inside and his eyes lit up slightly. It turned out to be the record of Zhenren Ruan's own travels. It was a good thing and could be regarded as the biggest gain since he came here. Of course, it also depended on whose hands this thing fell into. If the Shangzhen of Luoshan Monastery got it, he was afraid that he would only put it on the shelf. But in his hands, it was very useful. Even if the records inside were thousands of years old, they were still of great reference value. He put away the jade slips. Seeing that there was nothing worth paying attention to here, he left. When he got outside, he rolled up his sleeves and put the whole stone house away. He said to Chu Zhao, if there is nothing else, let's go. Chu Zhao responded, and smoke rose under his hooves. He followed Zhang Yan and flew to the magic boat. He thought that the inside of the magic boat would be cold and empty and boring, just like when he was Zhenren Ruan. He could only sleep during the journey. But when he boarded the boat, he found that it was a different world. There were valleys, rivers, plains and lakes, lush vegetation, and creatures everywhere. Except for the sun, moon, and stars, it was almost no different from the outside. He couldn't help but stare. Zhang Yan waved his hand, and the 4 restrictive formations swayed, covering the whole magic boat. He said, Chu Zhao, there are not many restrictions in my place. Except for my place of cultivation, you can go anywhere you want. Chu Zhao said happily, thank you, master. Zhang Yan said, do you know Mountain Lord Che Yen of Liuya World? Chu Zhao replied, how can I not know? This old demon has been in the lower bound for tens of thousands of years. He is very famous. The Shangzhen of the temple has tried many ways to drive him away. Zhang Yan said, no matter how powerful a demon is, in front of the Luo Mountain Temple and many Shangzhen, there is no reason why it can't be taken down. There must be a story behind it. Do you know? Chu Pang said, Master has asked the right person. This mountain master of Che Yen was originally a single-horned goat. I don't know where he got his luck, but he actually became the disciple of the Heavenly Lord Silence, and he even took him as a foster relative. This Heavenly Lord has remarkable abilities, and is much stronger than the sect master of the Luo Mountain Monastery. I'm afraid that is why the Heavenly Lords were unable to do anything to this single-horned goat. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. The Luo Mountain Temple's move was obviously to kill with a borrowed knife. They first used his knife to get rid of the demon, then used Shangjin Master Guan Ji to get rid of him. Although the result might not be the same, their intention was very sinister. But now was not the time to be calculative. When the time was right, he would have a good talk with them. He flicked his sleeves and returned to the main residence. Using his mana, he drove the sky-scraping ship and flew towards a cloud platform in the sky. A few days later, he saw a stone arch that was tens of thousands of feet tall standing in front of him. This was known as the Ring of 10,000 Emptiness. Rumor had it that it was created by the Palace Master of Green Jade Palace. There was this item in all the small and big worlds. Cultivators could use it to travel to the heavens without crossing the void's primal sea. It could be seen that there were many cultivators patrolling outside the stone ring. Ordinary cultivators had to pay offerings to the sect when they passed through. He had the letter that Adept One had given him to clear the way, so naturally no one came to stop him. He was allowed to pass through the ring and head down to the lower realm. At this moment, in the Luo Mountain Temple, Daoist Gong suddenly had a sudden impulse. He called a disciple over and asked, "Disciple, where is Priest Zhang?" The disciple said with a gloating expression, "I'm just now staring at the disc. He's already gone to the lower bound. It looks like he's really going to cause trouble for Mountain Master Che Yen." Daoist Gong thought for a moment and said, "He doesn't look like an impulsive person. He might not really fight the demon in the lower bound, but at least he left Xianhong Heaven. This is a good thing." He didn't expect Zhang Yan to fall for the trick. He just wanted to make things difficult for him. In his opinion, Zhang Yan was still unwilling to give up and wanted to find out more about Demon Lord Che Yen. The disciple said, "Master, do you think he'll come back?" Daoist Gong thought for a moment and shook his head. "Unless he really killed that demon, he won't come back for a while. Even if he comes back, I don't think he'll have the face to mention the divine item again." The disciple said, "Master is wise. With just a little trick, you drove him away." Daoist Gong smiled reservedly. However, he could faintly feel that this matter wouldn't end so easily. The divine item was something that Luo Mountain Temple had to protect. It couldn't fall into the hands of an outsider. He thought to himself, there's still 1,000 years until the time limit set by the Patriarch. It's not a long time, but it's not a short time either. If I can find a way to delay this person outside, it'll be much safer. After thinking for a while, he said, "Disciple, take my jade slip and send it to Daoist Zhu Rong. Ask him to do something for me." The disciple listened carefully and bowed. "Don't worry, Master. I'll definitely get it done." On the other side, Zhang Yan had successfully entered Lia World. Since he knew about Mountain Master Che Yan's background, he naturally wouldn't provoke this demon for no reason. He turned the skyscraping Dharma boat and headed toward the sect that claimed to have inherited the Tao of the Great Underworld Patriarch. This sect was called the Meridian Sect. The sect was located on an island. When he arrived, he revealed his identity and was welcomed inside. The attitude of the cultivators was extremely humble. He tried to understand it and found that the highest cultivation level here was a Grotto Heaven cultivator. However, he was old and on the verge of reincarnation. There weren't any outstanding figures in the younger generation. Therefore, the place where the sect was built was rumored to be the abode of the Great Underworld Patriarch. He originally wanted to take a look around, but when he arrived here, he found out that about 1,000 years ago, because the sect was attacked, its inheritance was almost severed. The Xianhong Heavenly Taoist found an excuse and moved the entire continent, including the abode, to the upper realm. Now, this sect actually had nothing to do with the Great Underworld Patriarch. Seeing that he didn't gain anything here, Zhang Yan didn't stay any longer. He left behind some medicinal pills and left in the skyscraping Dharma boat while the cultivators thanked him profusely. He planned to use the ring here to go to Suyang heaven. When he arrived there, he would first pay a visit to the sect passed down by Taoist Sun Yu before heading to his real destination, the Qinghua heaven. Chapter 15-17. Yuhuan Heavens, Suyang Heavens. Mystic light flashed, and the skyscraping spirit ship leaped out of the myriad emptiness ring. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand, and the letter that enlightened Master Wan gave him landed in his palm. He had already checked, and this item did not have the ability to chase across realms. However, once it reached the Xianhong heavens or the heavens that were on good terms with it, it might be detected by them. With a turn of his mana, the item instantly turned into ashes, and the faintly discernible qi activity also disappeared completely. He looked around, and saw that there were spirit ships and cloud rafts flying out of the ring from time to time, and they were all heading in the same direction. This did not seem like a normal situation, so he asked, Chu Zhao, has this realm always been this lively? Chu Zhao also found it strange. He thought for a while, and seemed to remember something, and said, Master, perhaps this is a coincidence of the 100 sects debate in this realm. He explained a little, and Zhang Yan then understood that this Su Yang Heavenly Lord's cultivation was extremely profound. In terms of mana alone, he was one of the top 19 Heavenly Lords. However, due to an accident, the sect he was in was destroyed. This enlightened master was indifferent, and he advocated doing nothing. He did not rebuild his sect, and usually only focused on cultivating, and did not care about the outside world. However, it was also because of this that this realm was not like the other heaven realms, where one sect ruled the entire heaven. Instead, there were hundreds of sects of various sizes coexisting. However, as the number of forces increased, conflicts naturally increased, and this led to the prevalence of fighting in this realm. But other than a few sects, the rest of the sects were similar in strength, and their sects were very far away from each other, so no one could think of annexing the other. Therefore, every 100 years, there would be a debate to resolve the conflicts between the sections. Because it was convenient to travel between the Yuhuan heavens, it also attracted many rogue cultivators from other realms to observe, and some were recruited into various sects to participate in the competition. If some were lucky, they would even be taken in as disciples by some almighty figures. As time passed, it became a grand gathering for cultivators of the younger generation to reveal their brilliance. Every single time, a large number of independent cultivators or cultivators that had lost their inheritance would come here with the hope that they would be chosen by a great figure and ascend into the heavens in a single bound. When Zhang Yan's carriage arrived, it drew the attention of those outside. The sky-split carriage was incomparably enormous, and the vital energy it revealed was vast and profound, causing even the world ring to tremble endlessly because of it. With a single glance, it was obvious that a great divinity had arrived. Even though the Middle Heaven Road was passable and the speed of the skyscraping magic boat was neither fast nor slow, many cultivators still took the initiative to move aside to show their respect. The cultivator guarding the realm ring didn't dare to be negligent. Because of the spell conference, there was a grotto heaven cultivator who came to watch over the realm ring. He could naturally tell that the person who came was a cultivator who had cultivated the root fruit. He immediately came out to welcome him and bowed. I'm Qin Bian, I've seen you before. How should I address you? What brings you to my realm? In the past, when a great figure like this came from other realms, they would usually inform their realm in advance to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings. However, there would occasionally be cultivators from other realms that came, so it was impossible to know in advance. Moreover, Zhang Yan's vital energy was obscure and deep, so it was difficult to tell where he came from. It should be known that there were also demonic cultivators in the Yuhuan heavens, and there was no lack of eccentric people among them, so he was very careful when speaking. After a while, he heard a voice by his ear. I came to your realm this time to pay a visit to a fellow Taoist. I won't be staying in this realm for long. When Qin Bian heard this, his heart relaxed slightly. It seemed that this great figure didn't need to use words to conceal what he wanted to do. It seemed that he really came to pay a visit. At this moment, he thought of something else. Could it be that this person was invited by a sect to help? In this spell conference, this sect's reputation would definitely increase by a lot, so he had to find a way to find out. Thus, he bowed again and said, "Please forgive me for being rude, but may I ask, which sect are you really going to pay a visit to? If it's someone you know, I can lead the way for you." Zhang Yan thought for a while. If someone from this realm led the way, it would save more trouble, so he said, "I want to go to Tambua sect this time. Is it convenient for Daoist friend?" Chen Bian came to a realization and thought, so it's an esteemed guest from Tambua sect. At the same time, he was also relieved. Tambua sect was one of the few powerful sects among the 100 clans, especially the founder, Daoist Sun Yu, whose cultivation was unfathomable. Even Green Jade Palace treated them with respect. However, there were few disciples in this sect and they didn't like to be ostentatious. During the spell conference, they usually only went through the motions and never fought with other sects, so they weren't a threat to Feng Shou Yard. He said, "My Feng Shou Yard and Tambua sect usually have dealings, but this sect is located in a small realm of the same Daoist realm, and it's extremely difficult for people who don't know the way to enter. Luckily, my sect has a teleportation formation door gifted by the sect leader of Tambua sect, which can lead to that place. Why don't you wait for a while and wait for me to send a message to order someone to set up the formation door, then it won't be difficult to get to that place." Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "That's fine too, thank you for your trouble." Chen Bian said he didn't dare to do so. Facing a Daoist Sun Yu, he couldn't hope to get on good terms with him, nor could he offend him. He didn't dare to be negligent and immediately went to make arrangements. Not long after, a few Daoists came to set up the formation door. Their actions were extremely fast, and in just half a day, there was a spiritual light screen that climbed up from above. Then, the Mo Kong spirit ship passed through it and disappeared in an instant. All the cultivators who saw this scene revealed expressions of envy and yearning. This was the power of a powerful cultivator. With such a realm, no matter where they went, everyone would treat them with respect. Even if they were enemies, they would have to put on a courteous appearance on the surface. Among the crowd, there was a young cultivator with slightly red eyes, and his gaze was especially scorching. He had cultivated for more than 500 years and achieved the Yuanying realm, but until now, he was still a lone cultivator. Even though he relied on some opportunities to reach his current realm, he didn't have the protection of a sect, the support of his peers, and the guidance of a master, so he had suffered a lot. He had always thought that if he could be placed under a large sect, his achievements would be far greater than what he had now. Today, he came to this supreme realm to find a good master. Perhaps this supreme true being is here to choose a disciple he likes. If I can defeat many opponents in the technique performance, perhaps I can become his disciple. There was far more than one person who had the same thought as him. There was even a rumor that a powerful being from beyond the heavens was coming to choose a disciple, and the person who obtained first place in the technique performance would receive the favor of this powerful being and become his disciple. Very quickly, this rumor became more and more intense, and it could not be stopped. After Chen Bian heard about this, he thought about it and did not take any methods to purposely eliminate it. Every time the technique performance was held, such news would spread, and he was already used to it. Perhaps this could even attract more geniuses here. As for whether or not this would cause the supreme true being to be displeased, there was no need to think too much about it, because that kind of powerful being would never care about what the lower generation cultivators thought. Coldly Small World was a vast expanse of blue waves. In the sky, there was a water curtain that covered tens of thousands of islands. In the middle of the land, tens of thousands of feet below the water, there was a cave made of jade. Inside sat a young Taoist who was calm and collected. He looked like a cool breeze and bright moon. This was the current sect master of the Tambua sect, Guangtong, and one of the very few mortal metamorphosis cultivators in Suyang Sky. In the place where he was meditating, there was a pool of water about 3 feet in front of him. It was originally quiet, without any ripples, without any dirt, like a mirror that had existed since ancient times. However, suddenly, there were some ripples in the air, as if an invisible stone had entered it, and there was a clear, ding-dong, sound. He opened his eyes and came out of meditation. After pondering for a moment, he called a boy in and said, "There will be an important guest coming over in the next few days. Tell Yan Qingzi to wait outside." Yan Qingzi was the eldest disciple of the sect, the candidate for the next sect master. After he heard the order from the sect master, a letter from the Fengshou courtyard arrived, and only then did he know that immortal metamorphosis Shang Zhen was coming to visit. He knew all the people who were friends with Guangtong, but he had never heard of this person. Even though he had some doubts, he still personally waited in front of the realm gate. Not long after, he suddenly felt a mysterious and profound aura descend. At the same time, his mind was in a trance. When he woke up, he found a young Taoist in a black robe standing in front of him. He actually didn't know when the other party arrived. He suppressed the surprise in his heart, bowed and said, "Tanbua sect's Yan Qingzi, greets Shang Zhen." Zhang Yan nodded in greeting and said, "No need to be so polite, Taoist." At this moment, a loud voice was heard, "Since Taoist has arrived, why don't you come in and have a chat?" Following the voice, a stream of water gushed out, accompanied by the sound of waves, all the way to his feet. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. He recognized the profundity of this technique. It was of the same origin as the Yutsang sect. He knew that the other party was using this to identify his identity. He took a step forward and rose above. He immediately used the water escape technique and followed the changes within. In a flash, he reached the end and arrived at a cave abode with rippling water. Guangtong sect stood up from his seat, raised his hand and bowed. He said with a smile, "When I was sitting today, I suddenly felt ripples in the lake of my heart. I knew that a fellow Taoist of the same lineage had arrived." "May I ask, which lineage are you from?" Zhang Yan returned the bow and said, "I am Zhang Yan, cultivating in Qinsang School. My sect was established by Taiming founding master." When Guangtong sect heard this, he couldn't help but be moved. He said, "So you are a disciple of founding master, I have been impolite." As he said this, his mind moved. He looked at Zhang Yan and tried to ask, "Did Taoist friend come here to take the divine item left behind by founding master?" Zhang Yan didn't hide anything. He said frankly, "Yes, I came here under founding master's guidance." Guangtong sect nodded and tried to ask, "So, Taoist friend has already been to Xianhong heaven?" Zhang Yan said concisely, "Just now, I am coming from there." Guangtong sect had a look of understanding. He said, "Then Taoist friend must have been obstructed. This person claims to be the orthodox lineage, he doesn't care about others of the same lineage, he has long treated the divine item as his own, he has never been willing to let others have it." Zhang Yan smiled. He said, "Let's not talk about that for now, I came here this time only to visit the same lineage, nothing else." Guangtong sect was a little surprised. He originally thought that Zhang Yan came here to ask for help. He didn't expect that to be the case. He took a deep look at the latter and said seriously, "Taoist friend, please take a seat and talk." Chapter 15-18. Zhang Yan and sect master Guangtong talked for a few days and learned a lot. The Tanbua sect was inherited from Master Sun Yu. They paid great attention to the cultivation of the state of mind. They were good at knowing fortune and misfortune and avoiding calamities. Therefore, even if Zhang Yan's realm was higher, the sect master could sense it before he came. Like the Luo Mountain Monastery, this sect also didn't receive the 3 scriptures. They only received the Yuanshan Spirit Sensing Cave scripture. There were many people in the sect who practiced this method, but there were only a few who achieved great success. This was not surprising. There were very few people who were compatible with this method. If you had no fate with this method, it would be useless no matter how hard you tried. However, in the past, Taoist Master Sun Yu had made some slight changes to this scripture and deduced another method from it, allowing most of the disciples to practice it. Now, more than 80% of the disciples in the sect were practicing this method. Regarding this method, Taoist Tong Guang was even willing to show the first half of the scripture to Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan looked at it and was greatly inspired. If he could bring it back to the sect and deduce it to perfection, it would be another method to pass on Tao. He originally wanted to exchange a superior method, but Taoist Tong Guang said, "Since you're proficient in the 9 scriptures, I wonder if you can deduce a method for me. Zhang Yan thought for a while and asked about the details of this method. Finally, he agreed. Taoist Tong Guang was very happy. The Tambua sect only had about 100 people, including registered disciples and some servants. The number of people was even smaller than the Qing sect in the past. It could not be compared to the famous Xian Hengtian. However, although there were not many people, there were 3 mortal metamorphosis cultivators in the sect, including Taoist Tong Guang. In the Suyang heaven, there were only 2 or 3 sects that could compare, so no one dared to provoke them. However, it wasn't that there were no hidden dangers. Because of the cultivation method, most of the people in the sect were inactive and had few desires. They just sat and watched. In the past thousands of years, they hadn't even accepted a single disciple. Others might not think about this, but as the sect master, Taoist Tong Guang couldn't ignore this. If this continued, if the 3 mortal metamorphosis cultivators died for some reason, then there was the danger of the method being cut off. However, the root of the problem was the method. Once people with similar temperament and cultivation reached a high level, they would also become like this. The best way to solve this problem was to have all sorts of high-tier cultivation methods to practice, but high-tier cultivation methods were not something that could be easily obtained. Hence, when he learned that Zhang Yan knew the 9-numbered sutra, he had the thought of asking Zhang Yan to derive it for him. The sect that Zhang Yan belonged to had the same origin as the Tambua sect. Furthermore, it was personally passed down by the patriarch, so it was the most authentic one. If he derived a cultivation method, it wouldn't be considered as another sect's cultivation method and could be used to cultivate it directly. Furthermore, Zhang Yan had already severed his deceased body, so the cultivation method he derived could at least reach the grotto heaven realm. As for whether or not one could cultivate to mortal metamorphosis, it not only depended on the method, but also depended on luck. This could not be forced. Zhang Yan accepted Taoist Tong Guang's invitation and stayed in the Tambua sect for a few months. He spent most of his time in the scripture pavilion, but he took this opportunity to read the Taoist books here. Deducing a method would take at least hundreds or thousands of years, but as long as a mortal metamorphosis cultivator was willing to use the divine will, they could greatly shorten the time. The only limitation was that they might lose too much of their own vitality. Fortunately, he had the remnant jade, so there was no need for such a huge consumption. Taoist Tong Guang didn't know this. Seeing that he was deducing the method every day, he ordered people to send a large number of purple clear medicine. Zhang Yan considered that he still had to go to Qinghua heaven, and this was what he deserved, so he accepted it without hesitation. When he was deducing the cultivation method, he was also summarizing and organizing what he knew. In this process, his understanding of the great mystery true technique deepened. He could faintly feel that he could make a breakthrough in this cultivation method. If he took a step forward, he would definitely be able to greatly improve his fighting ability. However, this feeling was erratic, and he could not accurately grasp it. After many days of fruitless thinking, he knew that this was not something that could be solved by simple deduction, so he decided to go out for a walk. As he walked out of the scripture pavilion, a loud and clear voice sounded, "Taoist Zhang has come out of seclusion." Zhang Yan looked over and saw a short, white, and chubby old man who looked like a child sitting on a tree branch. His 2 snow-white eyebrows were curved, almost reaching his knees. He said with a smile, "So it's fellow Taoist Tong Hai." This Taoist Tong Hai was Taoist Tong Guang's senior of the same generation, one of the 3 mortal metamorphosis upper Zhenren in Tambua sect. Although he looked like a little old man, he was forthright and straightforward. Because he liked to make friends, he was never in the sect. Today, because of Zhang Yan's visit, Taoist Tong Guang called him back with the sect master's order. The purple clear medicine was personally sent by this person a few days ago. Taoist Tong Hai wrinkled his nose, and his snow-white beard trembled. He said, "Deducing the method is not something that can be done in a day or two. Taoist Tong doesn't have to be too anxious." Zhang Yan smiled. If he had nothing to do, he could do it slowly, but he didn't have that much time to waste. He took out a leather bag filled with qi wine from his sleeve and drank 2 mouthfuls. Taoist Tong Hai took out a leather bag filled with chi wine from his sleeve and drank 2 mouthfuls. He said, "It's boring to be cooped up in the sect. I heard that the hundreds of sects in the inner realm are fighting. Although they are just juniors, it is still worth watching. Junior brother sect master also asked me to find a few more disciples. How about Taoist Tong Hai come with me?" Zhang Yan thought for a moment, then nodded and agreed. Taoist Tong Hai waved his hand and a banana leaf flew over. It enlarged until it could fit a pavilion. Just now, it stopped and he jumped onto it. Zhang Yan shook his sleeve and a furry creature the size of a palm flew out. However, in just a few breaths, it grew into a large beast that was 10,000 feet long with a single horn on its head and thick fur all over its body. He floated up and sat on the beast's body. Taoist Tong Hai raised his white eyebrows and asked, "What is this? I've never seen Daoren before." Zhang Yan smiled. "This thing is called the pig cow. It is obedient and can travel in the void." Taoist Tong Hai said, "Interesting." He urged the banana leaf to fly into the sky. The pig cow also moved and carried Zhang Yan into the sky. The two of them quickly passed through the small formation gate and arrived in Suyang sky. Taoist Tong Hai was very interested in talking. He said, "Fellow Taoist, do you know that 1,000 years ago, Xian Hengtian came and wanted me to make him an upper sect? However, he was stopped by sect master junior brother. This generation is just a guardian of the treasure, yet they are so arrogant. Let's see how much prestige they can still show after the time limit is up." Others might not know the ins and outs of Xian Hengtian, but how could the Tanbua sect not know? As for the fact that Xian Hengtian claimed to be the orthodox sect and treated all other sects of the same origin as him as a branch sect, the people from the Tanbua sect only laughed it off and did not bother to explain. This was because Mount Luo Monastery was indeed guarding the divine item for the founding master. Moreover, if they stood up for him before the 1,000,000 years were up, not only would they become a joke to others, they might even ruin the founding master's arrangements. Zhang Yan said, "I heard that your founding master Sun Yu, had 2 sections. How is the other one now?" Taoist Tong Hai said, "Fellow Taoist, are you talking about the Milky Lake sect? Sigh, I'm afraid the current situation is not very good. 1,000 years ago, the fellow Taoists of this sect received the Demon Subjugation Edict, and went to the ruins of chaotic stars to fight demons and evil. In the end, they were lost there, and not a single one of them returned. It's a pity that there are only a few juniors left in the sect. Because that place is in the heart melody world, the heavenly master is quite unyielding. As a sect of Xianyang sky, we can't interfere even if we want to. I wonder how it is now." Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "I am not from the universal heavens. If I have the chance this time, I will go there." Taoist Tong Hai's eyes lit up. He cupped his hands at him and said in a rare serious tone, "Then I'll leave it to you, fellow Taoist. Speaking of which, I, Tanbua, belong to the same lineage as him, but I can't be of help. I'm really ashamed." After flying for half a day, the two of them arrived in front of a teleportation formation gate. The cultivator guarding the gate obviously recognized Taoist Tong Hai. When he saw Zhang Yan, an unfamiliar Taoist whose aura faintly overshadowed the former, he knew that this was another mortal shedding true essence cultivator. He hurriedly went forward and personally activated the formation gate. Once Zhang Yan and Taoist Tong Hai passed through the inner formation gate, the scenery around them instantly changed. He looked up and saw a large floating island in front of him. Clear chi rose from the island, holding up millions of golden lamps. They drifted about and shone brilliantly like stars. This should be the place where they fought. However, at this moment, there were only a few cultivators flying about. It was very quiet. Taoist Tong Hai stroked his beard and said, "Seems like I came a little early." He turned his head and said with some embarrassment, "I've let fellow Taoists see a joke." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "It's fine. Didn't fellow Taoist come to find me? Since you're here, you might as well stay for a few days." Recently, he had seen the techniques of Tanbua sect. He knew that after the people of this sect cultivated to a high level, they would pay particular attention to fate. However, within the sect, there were two factions, active and static. The static didn't get involved with the outside world and waited in silence. They believed that people were heaven and earth and had their own fate, so there was no need to seek outside help. The active faction, like Taoist Tonghai, believed that fate was limited. Once you missed it, you wouldn't be able to get it again. Thus, he traveled outside all year round. Although his every move seemed random, he could unconsciously seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. This time, he suddenly wanted to come to this Dharma development conference. If there was no accident, he must have sensed something. Taoist Tonghai laughed and said, "That's fine. I have nothing to do anyway. As for finding a disciple." As he spoke, he suddenly made a sound of surprise. His gaze landed on a Taoist child who was hiding beside a bronze pillar and dozing off. "Fellow Taoist, look, this child is a little interesting." Zhang Yan looked over and saw that there was a layer of faint light on the child's body. This wasn't because he had some treasure on him, but because his body was full of essence that penetrated through his skin. He was only 7 or 8 years old and his body hadn't grown yet. Moreover, he was still fully human, yet he had such a strong foundation. This kind of foundation was really rare. Taoist Tonghai danced and clapped his hands and said, "Good luck, good luck. I didn't expect to meet such a good seedling. This should be my disciple." However, just as he was rejoicing, a scarlet wind blew past and swept the child away. A surprised voice came from inside the room. "Good, good, good. Gu Zhuang Yuanshe, you should be my disciple." These words were exactly the same as his. Taoist Tonghai instantly blew his beard and glared. He stood up from the banana leaf and scolded, "Which blind person dares to steal my disciple from me?" Chapter 15:19. With a gust of wind, a skinny Taoist in scarlet clothes appeared. The skin on his face was stiff, but his eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. He said, "Fellow Taoist Tonghai, please be kind with your words." Taoist Tonghai pointed at the child in his hand and said angrily, "Old man Chi Chang, I saw this disciple first, but you snatched him away first. What's the meaning of this?" When Zhang Yan was in the Tanbua sect, Taoist Tonghai had given him a detailed introduction of the aura and appearance of the mortal molten cultivators of this world. Upon hearing this person's name, Zhang Yan knew that he was a great expert of the heterodox path, and the power behind him was not small. Taoist Chi Chang did not argue about who was first. He first looked at Zhang Yan with great caution, then slowly said, "Tonghai, I think this disciple is not bad. Give me some face and let me have him, then I will owe you a favor." Taoist Tonghai said disdainfully, "Who cares about your favor?" Taoist Chi Chang's eyes sharpened. "Tonghai, what are you going to do? Are you going to fight me here?" Taoist Tonghai snorted. Although he was indignant, he would not fight with a peer over a disciple who had yet to enter the sect. Putting aside whether or not the disciple could survive the battle, both of them were people of status. It was fine to just bickering, but if they fought over it, it would only make a joke of themselves. Although Taoist Chi Chang had the disciple, he did not leave because he knew that if he did not settle the matter here, there would be trouble in the future. Moreover, Zhang Yan gave him an unfathomable feeling. Even if they fought, he was afraid that he would be at a disadvantage. He thought for a moment, then raised his voice and said, "Taoist Tonghai, why don't you listen to my suggestion?" Taoist Tonghai said impatiently, "Say it." Taoist Chi Chang said, "Since you and I both like this disciple, why don't we make a bet?" Taoist Tonghai stroked his beard and said, "What kind of bet?" Taoist Chi Shan pointed around and said, "Fellow Taoist, since you're here, I'm sure you're aware that there will be a competition here in a few days. Why don't you and I each pick one of those wandering cultivators and secretly give them some pointers? The one we pick will be able to go further, and he or she will be able to teach his or her disciple." The meaning of his words was obvious. The one who lost would naturally not be the one to teach the disciple. How would he have the face to accept such a talent? Tonghai snorted and thought for a moment, then agreed, let's do that. But before that, you can't take the boy away. Taoist Qi Shan thought for a moment and said, all right, I'll listen to you. With a flick of his sleeve, he ordered the child to return to where he had been napping. Then, he transformed into a streak of scarlet light and flew away. At the same time, a voice came from afar. Then, we'll meet again after the battle. Taoist Tong Hai said with a gloomy expression, it's rare for me to fancy a disciple, but he was almost snatched away. Zhang Yan smiled and said, could it be that you think your sect can't win this bet? Taoist Tong Hai sighed and said, it's difficult. Qi Chang's disciple does have a set of skills. I am not as good as him. What's more, he has a disciple nephew who is even better at this. Zhang Yan smiled and said nothing. Taoist Tong Hai glanced at him and showed hesitation. Finally, he gritted his teeth and cupped his hands and said, if you are willing to help, I will owe you a favor. When they made the agreement just now, the two sides did not clearly state what they should do and what they should not do. This left too much leeway for them to maneuver around. The two of them did not point it out, but in reality, they both had the intention of borrowing strength from each other. Zhang Yan smiled and said, you don't have to say that. If you have any request, I can help. But I think that Taoist Qi Chang will do the same. I don't think he can win. Taoist Tong Hai said confidently, it's just a show of our abilities. With Taoist Zhang's expertise in the Tao of 9 numbers, I don't believe that the person he finds can win against you. Zhang Yan said meaningfully, that's not necessarily true. If I choose a disciple, I have a 90% chance of winning against this person. But if you choose a disciple, it may not be true. Taoist Tong Hai was moved and thought for a while. After a while, he said sincerely, it's fine. No matter what the result is, I will recognize you this time. Zhang Yan nodded and said, since you trust me so much, I will do my best. It was naturally better to do this as soon as possible. But choosing a suitable person was not something Zhang Yan could interfere with. According to the agreement, only Daoran and Tong Hai could do it. The Dharma Developing Assembly was set to be 10 days later, but cultivators who participated in the assembly had arrived one after another. Most of them were Yuanying cultivators and were itinerant cultivators. If it was in the original 9 continents, it was already good enough for an itinerant cultivator to cultivate to the core formation realm. But the Yuhuan heavens was different. It was convenient to travel between worlds, and it was easier to obtain external objects. Who knew how many powerful cultivators had left their abodes and inheritances in some hidden worlds? However, it was still very possible for an itinerant cultivator to cultivate to the Yuanying realm, but it was difficult to reach the Grotto Heaven realm. After all, reaching this stage required the ability to move mountains and seas, and it also involved various superior cultivation methods. Moreover, it required a large amount of external medicine. Cultivators who did not have a strong foundation and the support of a great force could not achieve this. Daoran Tong Hai watched for a few days but did not find a suitable person. Then, he ran off to some unknown place. Zhang Yan guessed that he went to find a suitable person and encourage him to participate in the assembly. This way, it could not be considered a violation of the agreement. However, he did not leave this place. Instead, he carefully observed everyone in this place. He also decided to find another person to impart his cultivation method to. The purpose of choosing this person was to suppress his opponent and help the person chosen by Taoist Tong Hai to ascend to the position. He also believed that Taoist Qi Shan would definitely do the same. After a cultivator cultivated to the Yuanying realm, because their foundation was already set, it was not easy to improve their strength purely through cultivation methods unless there was a great opportunity. Moreover, some itinerant cultivators had already exhausted their potential. No matter how much help they received, they could not go far. There seemed to be a lot of people here, but in fact, there were very few people to choose from. When there were only 3 days left until the assembly, his gaze fell on a Taoist with red eyes. In terms of talent, although this person was not bad, he was not the most outstanding. However, this person had an extremely strong belief, which made him stand out among the crowd. This was very rare. After a cultivator entered the path, because of all kinds of tribulations, the sharpness of his body was usually blunted until the edges and corners were smoothed out. Itinerant cultivators were even more so, but the more setbacks they encountered, the more courageous they became. Clearly, they were born with an extraordinary temperament. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "It's you." He raised his finger and pointed. A ray of spiritual light condensed into a jade talisman. It flew towards the Taoist with red eyes who was sitting cross-legged and quickly entered the space between his eyebrows. At the same time, in the stone-striking sky, a giant the size of a small mountain was lying on the ground, as if he was in a deep sleep. The plants in the distance rose and fell with his continuous breathing. Although his body was huge and his face was fierce, there were many laughing plant spirits playing around on his body. It was obvious that he was not afraid. He was originally snoring loudly, but suddenly, his body trembled. His eyes opened and he sat up. The plant spirits also cried out in surprise and fell to the ground, disappearing one by one. The giant supported his head with his hand and revealed a look of contemplation. Just now, he suddenly felt a sense of fear. This had never happened before, and he guessed that something dangerous was about to happen. At this moment, he suddenly sensed two auras coming from the distance. One of them was huge, and it was his disciple, Zhu Ao. The other one was very unfamiliar, and he could not help but narrow his eyes. Not long after, the two of them arrived together. Zhu Ao said in surprise, "Teacher, you're awake." He pointed at the cultivator beside him and said, "Teacher, this is Tong Xinzhong, a disciple of Mount Luo Monastery's Gong Shangzhen. I've come to visit you on teacher's orders." Tong Xinzhong came forward and cupped his hands. Junior greets Zhu Rong Shangzhen. He knew that the person in front of him was not a human cultivator, but an unusual race known as a giant spirit. This race had huge bodies and were extremely brave. They were naturally suited to walk the path of strength. This person had even cultivated to an extremely profound realm. Even if his teacher fought him head-on, he might not be able to defeat him. Zhu Rong nodded and said, "I haven't seen Gong Shangzhen for several hundred years. How is he recently?" Tong Yozhong said respectfully, "Teacher is doing well. Here's a letter that teacher told me to give to Shangzhen." As he said that, he took out a jade letter and handed it over. Zhu Rong moved his body and took in a light breath. The jade letter suddenly flew over and spun in the air. When it landed in his hand, it was exactly the size of a palm. He opened it and looked at it. Then, he raised his head and said, "Go back and tell fellow Taoist Gong that I understand his intentions." Tong Xinzhong bowed again and turned to leave. Zhu Ao also seemed to sense something. He asked in a deep voice, "Teacher, is there something wrong?" Zhu Rong handed the jade letter to him and said, "Go and take a look." Zhu Ao took it and looked through it. His eyes widened as he said, "So Gong Shangzhen asked teacher to deal with someone." He raised his head and asked, "Teacher, are you going to make a move?" Zhu Rong said in a deep voice, "A long time ago, I formed a karmic relationship with this person. I have to return it to him. Since he came begging me, I must go." Zhu Ao said, "If teacher is going to make a move, this person definitely won't be able to escape." Zhu Rong shook his head and said, "It won't be that easy. If fellow Taoist Gong is right, this person's sect is the direct disciple of the great underworld patriarch. I don't know what kind of powerful divine art he has learned. I'm afraid he won't be easy to deal with." In order to prevent the matter from failing, Gong Shangzhen didn't purposely hide any information. He told Zhu Rong everything he knew about Zhang Yan's background and the skills that he had revealed. If it were any other time, Zhu Rong might not make a move immediately. However, just now, the palpitations he felt caused him to hesitate. Zhu Ao said in annoyance, "It's a pity that disciple is slow-witted. My skills are too shallow and I can't help teacher. Otherwise, I could help teacher share his burden." Zhu Rong stroked his beard that seemed to be pricked by needles. He said, it's a pity that your martial uncle has accepted the demon-subduing edict to kill demons and evils. I don't know when he'll return. Otherwise, with the two of us working together, it'll be easy to deal with this person. Looks like I'll have to borrow a few treasures. Website. Chapter 1520. Renji had originally been in a meditative state. But suddenly, he found that he had fallen into a state of confusion where it was hard to tell what was real and what was fake. Enemies were constantly charging at him, fighting him. He killed one, and then another. It was like there was no end to them. If it was anyone else, it wouldn't be long before they would feel despair and pessimism when faced with such an endless stream of enemies. However, he wasn't like that. He continued to deal with the incoming enemies calmly, as if he could continue to fight until the moment he died. Just as he was immersed in the battle, a thought seed appeared in Zhang Yan's hand. Through the battle in Renji's consciousness, Zhang Yan was able to easily learn all of Renji's cultivation methods and their variations. With this, Zhang Yan was able to deduce the most suitable cultivation method for Renji. Tong Hai said he didn't believe anyone could defeat him because of this. Even if Taoist Qi Chang taught another disciple, he wouldn't have the ability to do so. Another 2 days passed, and when there was only 1 day left until the battle, Taoist Tong Hai finally came back, but he brought a young cultivator with him. Zhang Yan smiled, "You're back, fellow Taoist." Taoist Tong Hai pointed at the young cultivator and said, "Fellow Taoist, what do you think of the person I chose?" The young cultivator's expression was calm, and he came forward to bow. Junior Xian Chuan greets great sage. Zhang Yan looked at him and commented, "Your aptitude is not bad." Taoist Tong Hai laughed and said proudly, "It took me a long time to find this kind of talent." He then bowed and said, "I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist to take care of him." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Of course. Since fellow Taoist has not been around, I have chosen someone." Taoist Tong Hai was surprised at first, but after thinking for a while, he understood his intention and said, "Fellow Taoist, are you using this person to prevent Taoist Qi Chang from using the same technique?" Zhang Yan nodded, "That's right." Taoist Tong Hai asked curiously, "Who and where did you choose?" Zhang Yan flicked his finger, and the spiritual seed turned into a ray of spiritual light that shot down. "This is the person." Taoist Tong Hai followed the light and saw a red-eyed cultivator. He frowned and said, "This person's aptitude seems ordinary." Zhang Yan smiled. Taoist Tong Hai believed that aptitude was the key, but Zhang Yan believed that temperament was more important in a competition like this, where the difference in cultivation wasn't too great. The methods developing competition was just around the corner, and it was practically impossible to quickly raise one's strength in a short period of time, unless one was bestowed a top-notch medicinal pill that could replenish one's spiritual essence. But this was actually a bad plan. Relying on medicinal pills to increase one's cultivation would not only not show off one's abilities, but one's opponent would also know at a glance. This was equivalent to admitting that one's teaching methods were not as good as others, and on the contrary, one's battle experience and the method of using one's spiritual essence could be made up for. Just like how he manifested different opponents in Renji's consciousness, the longer one endured, the more benefits one would receive. This depended on one's willpower, not aptitude. Only a person with a firm and unyielding temperament was the best choice just now. At this moment, on the other side, a Daoran person was kowtowing to Taoist Qi Chang with a look of gratitude. "Thank you, great sage, for bestowing this technique." Taoist Qi Chang's expression was indifferent, and he said, "Don't thank me. I told you before, if you use this technique too much, your spiritual essence will be exhausted and you will die. But I will definitely take care of your descendants, and I will not go back on my word." Just as Zhang Yan had expected, he had chosen another person to pass on the technique to, so as to pave the way for the cultivator he had chosen. As for why he did not pass it on to a few more people, first, because there were very few cultivators who were worthy of his attention. Second, the methods developing competition was backed by the various sects of Xianyang Heaven, and they would not allow him to do as he pleased here. He could choose 1 or 2 people to manipulate, and he could turn a blind eye to it. But if he chose a few more people, then he would be suspected of manipulating the methods developing competition behind his back, and when that time came, he would not be in a good mood. The Daoren person hesitated for a moment, and asked, "Great sage, how many times can I use this technique?" Daoist Qi Chang replied, "With your current lifespan, you can only use it 4 or 5 times at most. I have to warn you, the opponent this time is not to be underestimated. Do not use it unless it is a critical moment." The Daoren person quickly agreed. After Daoist Qi Chang sent him away, he turned around and came to the cave behind. There sat a cultivator with a rough face, thick eyebrows, and big eyes. At first glance, he did not seem to be very shrewd, but in fact, this person's talent was so high that it almost made the Daoist Qi Chang want to take him as a disciple. Unfortunately, he was still a rogue cultivator, and his path of cultivation had gone astray. His future achievements would be very limited, and at best, he would only be able to cultivate a Dharmakaya. It was really a pity. When the person saw Daoist Qi Chang enter, he stood up, bowed, and said, "Great sage, do you have any instructions for me?" Daoist Qi Chang said coldly, "Su Quan, how is your cultivation going?" Su Quan said respectfully, "What great sage has taught is very profound, and I have only understood a little of it." Daoist Qi Chang said, "It is good enough that you understand a little, and it will be enough for you to show off in the methods developing competition." Su Quan said, "I still have to thank great sage for helping me." Daoist Qi Chang said, "I have already built the bridge for you. Whether you can cross or not is up to you. You must remember, this matter is very important to me. If you lose, not only will I take your life, but your friends and relatives will also not escape." Su Quan did not seem to be affected by these words, and said calmly, "I will do my best." Daoist Qi Chang said nothing more, and his figure gradually disappeared. Seeing that he had left, Su Quan could not help but feel relieved. Although the cultivation methods that the other party had given him were profound, their origins were strange, and they did not seem to be from the Orthodox Church. Therefore, he did not dare to cultivate with all his strength, and still left some leeway. Although he knew that this might not be of much use, there was still a glimmer of hope. A day passed in the blink of an eye, and soon it was the day of the methods developing competition. Elders and deacons from all the sects had arrived, but most of them were hiding in the void sky, not showing themselves, so that the junior cultivators would not be affected by their qi dynamics. Daoist Tong Hai indeed had a wide circle of friends. 9 out of 10 of those who came were acquainted with him, and Zhang Yan also took this opportunity to get to know a few of the metamorphosis mortal cultivators in Xianyang heaven. At this moment, in Tianyu, Renji was sitting in a cave abode. A graceful lady walked in with a palace lantern in her hand, and there were a few maids behind her. She bowed to him and said, "Spiritual Master Ren, it's time for you to perform the technique in a moment." Renji asked, "Who is my opponent?" The woman said, "The sage's name is Li Yuankai, and I heard that he has a cultivation of the 2nd degree, which is the same as a sage." Most of the participants in the methods developing competition were Yuanying cultivators, but they were limited to the 1st and 2nd degrees. As for those who had cultivated the Yuanying Dharmakaya, all the sects were willing to put in effort to recruit them. Moreover, their battle prowess was far beyond that of the cultivators below them, so they naturally would not appear here. Renji stood up and walked out. When he stepped on a jade path, he felt his vision blur, and he arrived in a dense forest. He knew that this was just a change in the exterior scenery, and he was actually still in Tianyu. In front of him stood a green-robed Taoist with flying jade rings around him, and the Taoist was looking at him coldly. He raised his head and did not say a word. He only circulated his mana, and a dazzling glow rose from his body. He rushed up, and in an instant, he was fighting with the Taoist. After a few hours, he successfully defeated the Taoist and returned to the cave unscathed. He swallowed the elixir that the servant girl gave him, and after a short rest, he became energetic again. His eyes flashed. Over the past few days, whenever he meditated, there would be countless powerful enemies coming to fight him. Demons, ferocious monsters, cultivators, and other races, there was no one he was not prepared for. Inexplicably, there was an additional key to the method developing in his heart. Although he did not deliberately cultivate it, he could not help but use it when fighting enemies. Now, he had become more and more familiar with it. He was also a smart person, and he could guess that there must be a powerful cultivator who was trying to teach him. This was a rare opportunity, so not only did he not resist, but he also devoted himself to it. This caused his strength to grow even faster. Although his mana did not improve much, his fighting ability had increased by a lot. Just now, the green-robed Taoist was very powerful. Whether it was the cultivation of the Marquis or the divine Taoist arts, he was not inferior to him at all. If it was a few days ago, he might be able to win after a hard fight, but he would most likely suffer a great loss of vitality. Now, however, he did not pay much of a price and successfully defeated the Taoist. He thought to himself, I wonder which one helped me. If I can win this time, I must find a way to repay him. As the thought crossed his mind, he closed his eyes and entered a meditative state to fight the opponent that appeared in front of him again. In the following month, he frequently fought and defeated his opponents. His performance became more and more outstanding, and he actually caught the attention of many sections. There were indeed many people who came to recruit him, but he rejected all of them. Zhang Yan also saw Renji's performance these days. Seeing that he rejected the recruitment of the sects, he knew his intention, and he could not help but smile. This person's temperament was persevering, and he was indeed a talent that could be molded. As he traveled the heavens, he indeed needed someone to run errands for him. If he could really walk to the end, he could give him a chance. As the thought crossed his mind, an inexplicable feeling of danger arose in his heart. His eyes flashed, and he looked into the void. This feeling, it was obvious that someone wanted to harm him, and this person was about to arrive. In the heaven ring of Xianyang, Zhu Rong's enormous body squeezed out. His appearance caused the surrounding spiritual vigor to shake, and the floating island shook as if it was about to fall. The starlight in the sky also dimmed and brightened. The guards suddenly became very nervous. He came up and bowed. Supreme Being Zhu Rong, why have you come to my realm? Zhu Rong said, I'm here to find someone to return a favor to an old friend. You all can rest assured that this person is not a cultivator from your heaven Xianyang. If there are any losses, I will apologize to the heaven lord of Suyang. With that, he stomped on the ground. With a rumble, he tore open the void and disappeared. The guard's expression was ugly. He called for someone and said, go back and tell the other cultivators that Zhu Rong has come to our realm. This person is ruthless, and I don't know which guest has become enemies with him. We have to be on guard. Chapter 1521. Not long after the Taoist guard gave the order, rays of light flew in all directions. Some of them headed straight for the floating heavenly island where the conference was held. At this moment, Zhang Yan and Taoist Tong Hai were watching the battle below. Now, it was Xian Chuan's turn to fight. His performance was also very outstanding. In just a few rounds, he had suppressed his opponent and won easily. Seeing this, Taoist Tong Hai was very happy. Taoist Zhang, in your opinion, if Xian Chuan and Renji were to fight, who would win? Zhang Yan said, in a battle of life and death, Renji can win, but in a battle of techniques, Xian Chuan can win. Taoist Tong Hai thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. The way these two fought was completely different. Renji would often seize the opportunity to survive. This kind of method, it was either you die or I die, it was truly dangerous. Xian Chuan was not an independent cultivator, but a disciple of Taoist Tong Hai who lived in seclusion. It was just that he lived in a small world and was not known to outsiders. Not to mention his deep foundation, his skills were all top-notch. Not only that, he also had a few powerful magic treasures. This time, if he didn't know he could receive guidance from an expert, his master wouldn't have let him out no matter what. Ordinary independent cultivators couldn't compete with him, and he won every battle by a large margin. But this was just a technique conference, everyone knew that their lives weren't in danger, so they could bring out their full strength. But if it was a battle of life and death, it was different. There were too many factors that could affect the outcome. In this aspect, as an independent cultivator, Renji had experienced many battles, and Xian Chuan couldn't compare to him. Daoist Tong Hai looked around and said, Daoist Zhang, do you know where Qi Chang's chosen person is? Zhang Yan smiled, there are one or two suspicious people. In reality, regardless of who it was, Xian Chuan and Renji only needed to defeat all of their opponents to win the bet. As for whether the two of them would meet before then, the art exhibition was a round of battles, and the one with the most wins would win. Even if Renji took the initiative to concede against Xian Chuan, he would only lose one match. Up till now, he had not lost a single match, and thus it did not affect the overall situation. As he was speaking, he suddenly sensed something. He looked in a certain direction, and his eyes became deep and serene. Daoist Tong Hai also looked over but saw nothing. He asked curiously, fellow Daoist, is there something wrong? Zhang Yan pondered for a moment and said, fellow Daoist, if something happens later, please don't interfere. I will take care of it myself. Daoist Tong Hai was surprised to see how serious he was, but he didn't ask anything and just nodded while stroking his beard. At this moment, there was a series of sharp whistles, and rays of spiritual light flew over from afar. Daoist Tong Hai looked and his expression became serious, it's a warning message. There are so many of them, could something big have happened? He reached out and caught a message. He opened it and snorted, Zhu Rong. This person came to my Xianyang sky to stir up trouble again. How hateful. Zhang Yan sensed that this person seemed to be related to him, so he asked, who is this? Daoist Tong Hai said, this Zhu Rong is from the giant spirit tribe, but his bloodline isn't pure, so he was abandoned by the tribe long ago. Fortunately, one of his parents had a high status in the tribe, and left behind many legacies. Because of these things and his innate talent, a sect saw that he had a lot of potential, so they took him in. However, the sect was later destroyed by the demons, and he and a few of his junior brothers formed a loose alliance. For thousands of years, he roamed the heavens, and no matter who you are, as long as you can pay, he will help you get rid of your enemies. Zhang Yan said, it's very easy to offend people by doing this. This person is not simple to be able to roam freely until now. Daoist Tong Hai said, that's because this person has cultivated to the sixth transformation of strength path, and comprehended a technique to imbue flesh and blood. When fighting with others, even if he dies, he can come back to life with his remaining flesh and blood. Almost no one can kill him on the spot, and it's also because of this technique that the number of people who died in the hands of this person and his junior brothers can be counted on one hand. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. The number of mortal cultivators in the heavens was limited. Even if one of them died, it would still be a shock. This person could actually kill so many of his peers, and that was not just because of the secret technique. If he really wanted to deal with it, even the most powerful technique would have a way to break it. This person must have something else to rely on. As he thought of this, he asked, who is behind this person? Daoist Tong Hai said, fellow Daoist, you are right. Zhu Heaven's heavenly lord Zhu Yu is also a giant spirit. Rumor has it that this person is Zhu Rong's biological father, and his mother seems to have an even more powerful background. She seems to be a disciple of the Green Jade Palace, and Zhu Rong has never attacked the sects or the heavenly lords, so the heavenly lords can't be bothered to deal with him. Zhang Yan nodded, if that's the case, then it makes sense. As long as it was not a matter of personal interest, even a heavenly lord would not easily offend another heavenly lord, not to mention that this matter involved the Green Jade Palace. In reality, it was not that no one had tried to gather their peers to besiege Zhu Rong, but it was too difficult to do so. After reaching the realm of mortal transformation, which one of them was not an almighty being? If they wanted to gather, the commotion would definitely not be small, and they would have long been discovered by others. Moreover, with such a cultivation base, they would have a certain sense of danger. Zhu Rong was even more skilled in this, and almost every time, he would escape first. Daoist Tong Hai casually dissolved the warning talisman and sighed, Zhu Rong came here, I wonder who he is targeting. As he said this, he suddenly seemed to have thought of something, and his expression shook. He suddenly looked over, and his eyes widened. Fellow Taoist Zhang, could it be that this person is here for you? Zhang Yan smiled, and said, I'm afraid so. However, Taoist Tong Hai was anxious, and he grabbed his sleeve, and said, this person cannot be defeated by force. Even if you win, you will easily attract endless trouble. Let's go, fellow Taoist should return to the sect first, and it's better to avoid him. Zhang Yan smiled, and said, if I hide today, will I have to hide in the future? Taoist Tong Hai was startled, and he slowly let go of his hand, and said solemnly, then, fellow Taoist, please be careful. Zhang Yan nodded. With a rumble, a loud sound came from the sky, and the void suddenly split open. Then, an incomparably huge giant holding a golden hammer walked out. As this person arrived, Tianyu, which was not far away, was protected by the formation, but it also shook unstably, and the airflow in the sky raged wildly. The dense sea of clouds that gathered there was originally a hole, and it continued to spread in all directions. All the cultivators who were fighting felt their chi dynamic becoming unstable, and they felt that their mana was about to surge. All of them turned pale with fright, and they had to sit down and use the formation to suppress their chi dynamic. Jinren Fan too, who was present, frowned, and some people's expressions changed slightly. Through the warning message, they already knew that Zhu Rong had come to the realm, and they were originally worried about the instability of the sect, but they didn't expect that he would actually find this place. Then, the person he was looking for must be among them. A few of them secretly took precautions. It was hard to say that this person was not looking for them. At this time, it was already too late to hide, or else, if word got out, not only would they lose all their face, even the sect's reputation would be affected because of this. Just when the atmosphere was tense, a grand white light suddenly appeared in the sky, and from it, a person of Daoran wearing an apricot yellow Taoist robe and a Yunsong Dharma crown walked out. His body was wrapped in auspicious light, and he turned to Zhu Rong, and said, fellow Taoist Zhu Rong, this is the place where the 100 sects compete. Is it inappropriate for your chi dynamic to be so ostentatious? Unexpectedly, Zhu Rong was exceptionally easy to talk to this time, and nodded, fellow Taoist is right, I was rash. As he spoke, the chi dynamic on his body gradually converged, and Tianyu also stopped shaking. Doran's expression relaxed slightly. To be honest, there was almost no one here, including him, who was willing to face this person. If there was 30% fear of his strength, then the remaining 70% fear of the person behind him. However, he still did not let down his guard, and said, fellow Taoist Zhu Rong, why are you here? Zhu Rong said in a low voice, in front of the ring, I said that this time, I was entrusted by someone to come here to find a person, and it has nothing to do with the people of Xianyang Heaven, so fellow Taoist Lin can rest assured. That person of Daoran still frowned. Those who could come to the competition were not people who were on good terms with the sects, and more or less had some involvement. If he sat back and did nothing, it would not be good for his reputation if it was spread out. Zhu Rong seemed to see through his thoughts, and said, fellow Taoist need not be troubled, this person is also not from the Yuhuan heaven. As he spoke, he turned to look in a direction. Everyone also looked over, and saw that the place where his gaze landed was where Zhang Yan was. A few people could not help but show a look of sympathy, and secretly thought, I wonder how this person offended Zhu Rong. Zhu Rong stared at Zhang Yan. He was still a little suspicious about the inexplicable fear that day, but he could not be sure if it really should be related to the latter. He had already decided in his heart, if there was that kind of feeling at this moment, then he would retreat first, and wait for his junior brother to return, then he would deal with it. But after a long time, there were still no signs of warning, and he immediately relaxed. Under his gaze, Zhang Yan was as calm as before. There was no change in his expression, but at this moment, he had a feeling. He felt an inexplicable consciousness flash past his body, and he could not help but look up, and his heart sank slightly. This feeling was extremely weak, it was not easy to find the source, and it did not seem to have malicious intent towards him. At this moment, a great enemy was in front of him. It was not the time to pay attention to it. In the depths of void sky, a Taoist put away a green jade badge and turned around. He cupped his fists towards an incomparably grand light and said, "Master, disciple has already concealed the changes in the heavenly secrets, but that Taoist Zhang seems to have noticed something." A voice came out from the bright light, "It's okay, this Shinran Zhang's cultivation is quite high, he can tell the pros and cons, he won't say much." 8.